You've spent years trying to forget what happened, but your body keeps remembering. The truth is that trauma doesn't just live in your mind. It's literally stored in your muscles, in your breath, in the tension you carry without realizing it. Buddhist monks discovered 500 years ago that you can't think your way out of trauma because it's not a mental problem. That's why traditional therapy sometimes doesn't work completely. When you learn these 8 specific Buddhist techniques to release trauma from the body, something extraordinary happens. You stop fighting the memories, and they begin to dissolve on their own. Your body knows how to heal. You just need to give it permission the right way. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment from which part of the world you're watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. In the quiet moments between the rushing streams of daily life, when the world pauses just long enough for you to remember who you are beneath all the doing and becoming, there lives an ancient wisdom that has whispered healing truths for over 2,500 years. This wisdom doesn't come from books or theories, but from the lived experience of countless souls who discovered that the body and mind are not separate territories, but one seamless landscape where healing and peace naturally arise when we learn to tend them with the right understanding. The Buddha, sitting beneath the Bodhi tree 25 centuries ago, wasn't just discovering enlightenment in some abstract sense. He was uncovering the profound truth that suffering often manifests as tension held in the body, as patterns of reactivity stored in our nervous system, as wounds that live not just in our memories but in our very cells. And more importantly, he discovered that liberation from this suffering is not only possible, but our natural state when we learn to work skillfully with the intimate connection between our physical and emotional being. You don't need to be a Buddhist to receive these gifts. You don't need to adopt any particular beliefs or change your religion or philosophy. These practices are like clear water that takes the shape of whatever container receives it. They adapt to your life, your challenges, your unique path toward greater wholeness. What you need is simply an open heart and a willingness to explore what it might feel like to tend your inner landscape with the same care you would give to a beloved garden. In a monastery nestled in the mountains of ancient Tibet, there lived a healing master who was known throughout the region not for performing miracles, but for teaching people to recognize the miracles already present within their own bodies. Travelers would come from distant lands, carrying in their flesh the accumulated tensions of difficult lives, the held breath of unprocessed grief, the tight shoulders of carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. The master would greet each visitor with the same gentle question. "Tell me, what is your body trying to teach you?" Many would look confused. They had come seeking healing for their minds, their emotions, their spiritual struggles. But this wise teacher understood something profound that modern science is only now beginning to rediscover. The body holds not just our physical experience, but the memory of every joy, every trauma, every moment of beauty, and every instance of pain we've ever encountered. Your body, the master would explain as he invited visitors to sit beside him in the monastery garden, is not just a vessel that carries your consciousness. It is consciousness itself, wearing the temporary costume of flesh and breath. When you learn to listen to its wisdom, when you learn to honor its messages, when you learn to release what it has been storing for you until you are ready to heal, you discover that the path to peace has been within you all along. This understanding forms the foundation of everything we'll explore together. The 8 Buddhist practices we'll discover aren't techniques to be applied from the outside, like putting salve on a wound. They are ways of remembering and returning to the natural wisdom that your body and mind already possess. Ways of creating space for healing that is always wanting to happen, always moving toward wholeness when the conditions are right. Think of how a cut on your finger heals without your conscious effort. You don't have to think about directing blood cells to the injury or commanding tissue to regenerate. The body knows how to heal itself when given the proper environment. In the same way, the tensions and traumas held in your system know how to release when you create the right conditions of safety, acceptance, and gentle attention. These Buddhist practices are ways of creating those conditions. The first practice we'll explore is the cultivation of what Buddhist teachers call mindful embodiment, the art of inhabiting your physical form with conscious presence rather than existing as a disembodied mind that happens to be housed in flesh. Most of us spend our days as refugees from our own bodies, living primarily in our heads, aware of our physical selves only when something hurts or demands attention. But mindful embodiment invites us into a completely different relationship with our incarnation. Imagine for a moment that your body is a wise old tree, its roots extending deep into the earth, its branches reaching toward the sky, its trunk steady and strong despite the many seasons it has weathered. This tree doesn't resist the wind that bends its branches or fight against the rain that soaks its bark. It remains rooted while allowing movement, stable while staying flexible. When you practice mindful embodiment, you're learning to inhabit your body the way this tree inhabits the forest, with presence, acceptance, and trust in your own natural resilience. There's a beautiful teaching story from ancient China about a student who approached her master complaining of chronic pain in her neck and shoulders. "I've tried everything," she said. "Medicines, treatments, exercises. Nothing seems to help for long. The tension always returns." The master listened compassionately and then asked, "When did you last thank your shoulders for all they carry?" The student looked confused. "Thank them? But they hurt." "They're the problem." The master smiled gently. "Perhaps that's exactly why they need your gratitude. They've been carrying your burdens faithfully for years, and instead of appreciation, you've been at war with them. What might happen if you approached them as beloved friends rather than enemies?" This story illuminates something revolutionary about healing. We often treat the parts of our bodies that hold tension or pain as problems to be fixed rather than messengers to be heard. But mindful embodiment teaches us to approach our physical experience with curiosity and kindness rather than judgment and resistance. Your tight shoulders aren't betraying you. They're doing their best to help you carry whatever you've been carrying. Your shallow breathing isn't a failure. It's your nervous system's attempt to protect you from feeling overwhelmed. When you begin to practice mindful embodiment, you start with the simplest possible awareness, simply noticing that you have a body, that you're breathing, that there's sensation present in this moment. You don't try to change anything or fix anything. You simply acknowledge what's here with the same gentle attention you might give to a small child who's been trying to get your attention for a long time. Place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly right now. Feel the rise and fall of your breath. Notice how your rib cage expands on the inhale and settles on the exhale. This isn't a breathing exercise. This is simply a moment of remembering that you are a breathing being, that life is moving through you right now, that your body is participating in the miracle of existence with every single breath. Feel how this simple attention begins to shift something in your nervous system. When you bring conscious awareness to your breathing, you're sending a signal to your body that says, "I'm here with you. I'm paying attention. You're safe to relax." This isn't magic. This is how your nervous system actually works. The very act of mindful attention activates what scientists call the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your autonomic system responsible for rest, healing, and restoration. Buddhist teachers understood this connection thousands of years before we had scientific language to describe it. They recognized that consciousness and embodiment are not separate phenomena, but different aspects of one seamless reality. When you change your relationship with your body, you change your entire experience of being alive. When you learn to inhabit your physical form with presence and kindness, you create the conditions for natural healing to occur. The second practice builds naturally from the first, and is known in Buddhist tradition as the cultivation of loving awareness toward physical sensation. This doesn't mean trying to love pain or pretending that discomfort feels good. It means approaching whatever sensations arise in your body with the same unconditional acceptance that a loving mother offers to her child, regardless of the child's mood or behavior. In the monasteries of ancient Burma, healing monks practiced what they called sensation meditation. They would sit quietly and simply observe whatever physical sensations arose in their bodies without trying to change them or make them go away. Pain, pleasure, tension, relaxation, warmth, coolness, all were greeted with the same equanimous awareness. The monks discovered that when sensations are met with resistance, they tend to intensify and persist. But when they're met with accepting awareness, they often transform naturally, like clouds changing shape in an open sky. This practice requires a fundamental shift in how we relate to discomfort. In our culture, we're taught that pain is always a problem to be solved, that any unpleasant sensation should be eliminated as quickly as possible. But Buddhist wisdom recognizes that many of the sensations we label as problems are actually the body's natural process of releasing stored tension and trauma. When we fight against these sensations, we often interrupt the very healing process our bodies are trying to complete. Think of how a muscle feels when you stretch it after sitting for a long time. There's often an initial sensation of discomfort, even pain, as the tight fibers begin to lengthen and relax. If you immediately stop stretching because of this discomfort, the muscle remains tight. But if you breathe into the sensation, staying present with it while maintaining a gentle stretch, the discomfort often gives way to relief and increased flexibility. The same principle applies to emotional and energetic tension held in the body. There's a profound teaching story about a meditation master who developed severe arthritis in her hands. Students expected her to be upset or to seek aggressive treatment. Instead, they found her each morning, sitting quietly, holding her painful hands in her lap with the most serene expression. When asked how she could be so peaceful with such obvious discomfort, she replied, "I am learning to love my hands exactly as they are. For decades, they served me perfectly, allowing me to write, to cook, to touch the faces of those I loved. Now they are teaching me a different lesson about impermanence and acceptance. Who am I to reject this teaching simply because it comes wrapped in sensation I would not have chosen?" This doesn't mean becoming passive about health concerns or ignoring symptoms that need medical attention.
It means developing the capacity to be present with your physical experience without immediately falling into patterns of resistance, fear, or judgment.
When you can stay present with sensation, even uncomfortable sensation, without adding layers of mental suffering on top of it, you often discover that your relationship with pain itself begins to transform. The practice begins with small sensations. Perhaps you notice tension in your jaw, and instead of immediately trying to relax it, you simply breathe with it, acknowledging its presence with kindness. Maybe you feel tightness in your chest, and instead of pushing it away, you place your hand there gently and send appreciation to that part of your body for holding whatever it's been holding until you are ready to feel it. This loving awareness towards sensation becomes a form of internal massage, a way of tending to your body's needs without forcing or manipulating. It's like being a devoted gardener who tends each plant according to its unique needs, providing water to what's dry, shade to what's been in too much sun, gentle attention to what's been neglected. Your body, like a garden, responds to this kind of caring attention by naturally moving toward greater health and balance. As you develop this practice, you may notice that sensations you've been fighting against for years begin to soften when met with acceptance. Headaches that have resisted every treatment may ease when you stop treating them as enemies and start approaching them as messengers. Digestive issues that have persisted despite dietary changes may begin to resolve when you send love to your stomach instead of frustration. This isn't because positive thinking cures everything, but because the nervous system that controls healing functions best in an environment of safety and acceptance, rather than fear and resistance. The third practice deepens this work by exploring what Buddhist teachers call conscious breathing, not as a technique to control or manipulate the breath, but as a way of partnering with the life force that sustains you. Your breath is perhaps the most intimate interface between your conscious mind and your autonomic nervous system, the bridge between what you can control and what happens automatically to keep you alive. In the ancient Vedic traditions that influenced early Buddhism, breath was understood to be far more than just the exchange of gases that keeps the body functioning. It was recognized as the vehicle through which life force, what they called prana, moves through the body, nourishing not just the physical cells, but the subtle energy systems that support emotional and spiritual well-being. When your breathing is restricted, whether through stress, trauma, or simply unconscious habits, this life force cannot circulate freely, leading to stagnation and tension in various parts of your system. There's a beautiful story from the early Buddhist texts about a student who came to the Buddha complaining of persistent anxiety and an inability to find peace in meditation. The Buddha didn't give him complex philosophical teachings or elaborate practices. Instead, he simply said, "Go sit by the river and watch how the water flows around the stones. Notice how it doesn't fight against obstacles, but finds the most natural path. Then, come back and tell me what your breath wants to teach you about flowing like water." The student spent hours by the river, initially confused by this seemingly simple instruction, but gradually he began to notice how his breathing changed as he watched the water. When he first sat down, his breath was shallow and irregular, matching his anxious state of mind. But as he relaxed into observing the river's natural flow, his breathing began to slow and deepen automatically. He realized that he had been trying to force his breath into patterns he thought were correct, instead of allowing it to find its own natural rhythm. When he returned to the Buddha, he was glowing with understanding. "I see now," he said. "I was treating my breath like an enemy to be conquered, instead of a teacher to be followed. When I stopped trying to control it and started listening to what it wanted to do naturally, it began to breathe me instead of me breathing it." The Buddha smiled and replied, "Now you understand the difference between doing and being. Your breath knows how to heal you if you learn how to get out of its way." This story illustrates the essence of conscious breathing as a healing practice. It's not about imposing specific breathing patterns or trying to breathe in a correct way. It's about developing an intimate, trusting relationship with your breath as a wise guide that can lead you back to balance and peace. Your breath responds to your emotional state, but it can also influence your emotional state. When you breathe in a scattered, anxious way, you reinforce feelings of stress and disconnection. When you allow your breath to slow and deepen naturally, you signal to your nervous system that it's safe to relax. The practice begins with simply noticing your breath without changing it. Sit quietly for a few moments and observe how you're breathing right now. Is it shallow or deep, fast or slow, smooth or irregular? There's no wrong way to breathe in this moment of observation. You're simply gathering information about your current state, the way you might check the weather, before deciding what to wear. After this initial observation, you can begin to invite your breath to slow and deepen, not by forcing it into a particular pattern, but by creating space for it to expand naturally. Imagine that your torso is like a balloon that can gently inflate on the inhale and deflate on the exhale. Instead of breathing only into your chest, allow your breath to move all the way down into your belly, expanding your entire torso three-dimensionally. This isn't strenuous effort. It's more like removing obstacles that have been preventing your breath from moving freely. As you practice this conscious breathing, you may notice that emotions arise or that tension in various parts of your body begins to shift. This is completely natural. The breath is intimately connected to the autonomic nervous system, and when breathing patterns change, they often trigger the release of stored emotions or physical tension. If feelings arise, simply breathe with them the same way you're breathing with your physical sensations, neither pushing them away nor getting lost in them. The seventh practice emerges from one of the most profound discoveries in Buddhist psychology: the recognition that forgiveness is not primarily about the person who hurt you, but about liberating your own body and nervous system from the burden of carrying resentment. This understanding turns forgiveness from a moral obligation into a practical healing tool, something you do not because someone deserves it, but because you deserve the freedom that comes when you're no longer imprisoned by your own anger. In the ancient texts, there's a teaching story about a monk who carried hot coals in his bare hands, intending to throw them at someone who had insulted him. A wise teacher who witnessed this asked, "Tell me, who is being burned by those coals right now?" The monk looked down at his blistered palms and suddenly understood. The person he wanted to hurt was walking freely, while he was the one suffering from his own anger. This story illustrates something that modern neuroscience has confirmed. When you hold on to resentment, your nervous system remains in a state of chronic activation. Your body produces stress hormones, not just when you think about the person who hurt you, but often as a baseline condition. Your muscles stay partially contracted, your breathing remains shallow, your digestive system operates less efficiently. You're literally carrying the physiological burden of unfinished anger, and this burden affects every aspect of your health and well-being. But Buddhist forgiveness is radically different from the forgiveness often taught in other contexts. It doesn't require you to condone harmful behavior, maintain relationships with people who continue to hurt you, or pretend that painful experiences didn't matter. It doesn't ask you to forgive before you're ready, or to bypass the natural process of grief and anger that follows betrayal or harm. Instead, Buddhist forgiveness is fundamentally about understanding the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is what happened to you, the actual event or series of events that caused harm. This pain is real, valid, and often permanent. You cannot and should not try to eliminate the reality of what occurred, but suffering is what you add to pain through resistance, rumination, and the stories you tell yourself about what the pain means about you, about life, about your safety in the world. There's a beautiful teaching from a Vietnamese monastery about a woman who came seeking help after years of physical and emotional abuse from her former husband. She had left the relationship and was physically safe, but her body remained in a constant state of hypervigilance. She couldn't sleep deeply, startled at unexpected sounds, and felt rage that seemed to live in her cells themselves. The monk who counseled her didn't suggest that she should forgive her abuser or that her anger was wrong. Instead, he helped her understand that her nervous system was still responding to a threat that was no longer present. Her body, in its wisdom, had learned to stay activated to protect her from ongoing danger. Now that she was safe, her system needed help learning how to downregulate. "Your anger served you well," he told her. "It gave you the energy to leave, the clarity to recognize that you deserved better treatment, the fire to rebuild your life. Honor that anger for what it accomplished. But now ask yourself, is this level of activation still serving your healing, or is it keeping you trapped in a prison of your own nervous system?" Together, they explored practices that allowed her to acknowledge her anger while also creating space for her body to remember safety. She learned to distinguish between honoring her legitimate anger about what had happened and carrying that anger as a constant companion that colored every moment of her present life. This wasn't about forgiving her abuser, but about forgiving her own body for the ways it had learned to protect her, even when those protections were no longer necessary. The practice of Buddhist forgiveness begins with what teachers call radical honesty about your actual experience. This means acknowledging the full extent of how you were hurt without minimizing or explaining it away. It means feeling your anger completely, allowing it to move through your body without judgment or premature attempts to let it go. It means recognizing that your protective responses were intelligent and necessary. Even if they now feel burdensome, sit quietly and bring to mind a situation where you feel you've been carrying resentment or unfinished anger. Don't choose the most traumatic experience you've ever had, especially when beginning this practice. Start with something significant but manageable: a betrayal by a friend, unfair treatment at work, or disappointment from a family member. Notice what happens in your body when you think about this situation. Do your shoulders tighten? Does your breathing become shallow? Do you feel heat or tension anywhere? Does your jaw clench or your stomach contract? These physical responses are your body's memory of the original hurt, your nervous system's way of staying prepared for similar threats. Now, instead of trying to change these sensations, speak to them with compassion. You might say internally, "I understand that you're still protecting me from being hurt again. Thank you for working so hard to keep me safe. I want you to know that I'm listening to you, and I'm going to take good care of us both." This isn't about making the sensations go away, but about changing your relationship with them from resistance to acceptance. The next step is distinguishing between the person who hurt you and the pain they caused. This doesn't mean excusing their behavior or minimizing their responsibility. It means recognizing that the person who hurt you was likely acting from their own unhealed wounds, their own fear, their own unconscious patterns. This recognition doesn't make their actions acceptable, but it can help you understand that their behavior was more about their limitations than about your worth. There's a profound teaching story about a master archer whose student was struck by a poisoned arrow. The student cried out, "Master, I've been shot. Who did this to me? What kind of poison is this? What wood was used to make the arrow? Who fletched it?" The master calmly began removing the arrow while saying, "My friend, while you're asking all these questions, the poison is spreading through your system. Let's remove the arrow first, then we can investigate who shot it and why. This story illustrates the practical nature of Buddhist forgiveness. While it may be important to understand what happened and why, and to take appropriate action to prevent future harm, the most urgent need is often to remove the poison of carrying resentment in your own system. The person who hurt you may never apologize, change, or even acknowledge what they did, but you can still free yourself from the ongoing toxicity of unresolved anger. This freedom doesn't come through forced forgiveness or positive thinking. It comes through a gradual process of metabolizing the anger completely, allowing it to move through your system until it transforms into something else. Wisdom, boundaries, compassion for others who have suffered similarly, or simply the energy that was tied up in resentment becoming available for healing and growth. The eighth and final practice builds naturally from this work on forgiveness and introduces what Buddhist teachers call gratitude as a healing force. This isn't the superficial gratitude often promoted in wellness culture, where you're encouraged to be thankful for everything, regardless of how difficult it actually is. This is a deeper practice of recognizing the support, beauty, and gifts that exist alongside life's inevitable challenges. Buddhist gratitude practice recognizes that even in the midst of genuine difficulty, there are always elements of your experience worthy of appreciation. This isn't denial of problems or toxic positivity. It's training your nervous system to notice and receive the nourishment that's available even during challenging times. When your system is chronically focused on threats and problems, it can lose the ability to recognize and absorb positive experiences. Gratitude practice helps restore this capacity. In a monastery in ancient Korea, there lived a monk who had lost his sight in an accident. Other monks expected him to be bitter or depressed, but instead, he radiated a joy that seemed to light up every room he entered. When students asked him how he maintained such happiness despite his blindness, he would smile and say, "I have discovered that I can see many things that sighted people miss." He explained that losing his physical sight had opened what he called his gratitude vision. "I can see the kindness in a person's voice, the beauty in the sound of rain on the roof, the miracle of breath moving in and out of my body. I can see how much love surrounds me in ways I never noticed when I was distracted by visual appearances. My eyes may not work, but my capacity to perceive blessings has become extraordinarily sharp." This monk had discovered something profound about the relationship between attention and experience. What you consistently focus on literally changes the structure of your brain through what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. If you habitually notice problems, threats, and disappointments, your brain becomes increasingly efficient at detecting these patterns. But if you train yourself to also notice support, beauty, and moments of grace, your brain develops stronger neural pathways for recognizing these experiences as well. Gratitude practice doesn't replace appropriate responses to genuine problems. You can be grateful for your friend's support while also setting boundaries with their problematic behavior. You can appreciate your body's strength while also seeking treatment for health issues. You can feel thankful for moments of beauty in your day while also acknowledging that you're going through a difficult period. Gratitude adds richness and balance to your perception rather than replacing discernment with denial. The practice begins with what teachers call micro-gratitudes, moments throughout the day when you pause to acknowledge something supportive or beautiful that's happening right now. This might be appreciation for the warmth of sunlight on your skin, gratitude for a friend's text message, or thankfulness for your body's ability to walk upstairs. These micro-gratitudes work on your nervous system like deposits in a bank account, gradually building up your capacity to feel resourced and supported. As you're sitting here right now, take a moment to notice 3 things you can feel grateful for in this immediate moment. Perhaps you can appreciate that you have a comfortable place to sit, that you're learning something new, that you're taking time to care for your well-being. These don't have to be profound or life-changing. Simple appreciation for ordinary gifts trains your system to recognize abundance rather than focusing exclusively on what's missing or wrong. Over time, this practice can expand to include gratitude for difficult experiences that contributed to your growth, appreciation for your own resilience in surviving challenges, and thankfulness for the web of relationships and circumstances that support your existence, even when that support isn't immediately visible. You might feel grateful for the grocery store workers who make your food available, the ancestors whose struggles made your current life possible, or the natural systems that provide the air you breathe and the water you drink. This expanded gratitude creates what Buddhist teachers call interconnectedness awareness, the recognition that your well-being is intimately connected to the well-being of countless other beings and systems. When you truly understand how supported you are by life itself, feelings of isolation and separation begin to dissolve. Your nervous system relaxes into a felt sense of belonging that supports healing at the deepest levels. There's a beautiful practice from Tibetan Buddhism called giving and receiving meditation, where you imagine breathing in the suffering of others and breathing out relief and healing. This might sound masochistic or overwhelming, but it's actually based on a profound understanding of how healing works. When you're willing to hold space for difficulty, whether your own or others, without trying to immediately fix or escape it, you discover that you have a much greater capacity for resilience than you initially believed. This practice works with the recognition that much of what we label as individual suffering is actually shared human experience. The loneliness you feel is felt by millions of others. The fear you carry is carried by countless fellow humans. The physical pain in your body is similar to pain experienced throughout history. When you stop seeing your difficulties as evidence of your personal failure or uniquely terrible fate, you can begin to hold them with the same compassion you would offer to anyone facing similar challenges. As these 8 practices begin to weave together in your daily life, conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, and gratitude cultivation, they create what Buddhist teachers call a mandala of healing. Each practice supports and enhances the others, creating a comprehensive approach to well-being that addresses not just symptoms, but the underlying patterns that create suffering. These practices work by gradually shifting your nervous system from chronic activation to a baseline of calm alertness. They help you process stored trauma and tension not by forcing it to leave, but by creating the conditions where it can complete its natural cycle of activation and release. They train your attention to notice and receive positive experiences rather than filtering them out due to hypervigilance or depression. Most importantly, they help you remember that healing is not something that happens to you, but something that you are actively participating in moment by moment through how you relate to your own experience. You become both the gardener and the garden, tending to your inner landscape with the same patience and wisdom that nature demonstrates in its cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. The path of Buddhist healing recognizes that suffering is inevitable, but that adding unnecessary suffering through resistance, self-criticism, and disconnection from your body's wisdom is optional. These practices offer you concrete ways to stay present with life's inevitable challenges, while also creating space for joy, peace, and deep healing to emerge naturally from within your own being. As these practices begin to establish themselves in the landscape of your daily experience, something beautiful starts to emerge that the Buddhist masters called the natural rhythm of awakening. You might notice that your body feels different when you wake up in the morning, less braced against the day ahead, and more curious about what will unfold. You might find yourself pausing naturally throughout the day to take a conscious breath, not because you've scheduled it, but because your system has begun to crave these moments of return to presence. You might discover that situations that used to trigger immediate reactivity now create a small space of awareness where choice becomes possible. This natural rhythm of awakening reflects one of the most profound insights in Buddhist psychology, the understanding that healing happens in layers, like the slow work of water gradually smoothing rough stone. Each time you choose conscious breathing over unconscious holding, each time you meet sensation with acceptance rather than resistance, each time you speak to yourself with kindness instead of criticism, but you're participating in this ancient process of transformation. There's a teaching story from a monastery in ancient Myanmar about a student who became frustrated with what seemed like slow progress in her healing journey. She had been practicing mindful awareness of her chronic pain for months, yet the pain remained as intense as ever. "Master," she complained, "I've been doing everything you taught me, but nothing has changed. The pain is still here. Am I doing something wrong?" The master led her to the monastery garden where an enormous tree grew, its trunk so wide that several people holding hands couldn't reach around it. "Tell me," he asked, "how long do you think this tree has been growing?" The student examined the massive trunk and thick branches. "Many decades, perhaps a century or more," the master nodded. "And do you think someone could have watched it grow from day to day and seen the changes happening?" She shook her head. "No, the daily growth would be invisible. Healing is like this tree," the master explained. "The changes are real and constant, but they happen at the pace of nature, not the pace of our impatience. Your pain may still be present, but how you relate to it has been transforming. Your nervous system has been learning new patterns of response. Your capacity to stay present with difficulty has been growing stronger. These changes are as real as the tree's growth, even though you can't see them from day to day." The student began to notice that while her pain levels hadn't dramatically decreased, her relationship with the pain had indeed been shifting. She could stay present with discomfort for longer periods without falling into panic or despair. She had developed the ability to feel pain in her leg without her entire body contracting in response. She could experience a flare-up of symptoms without immediately catastrophizing about what it meant for her future. These subtle shifts represent what Buddhist teachers call the deepening of practice, the way that repeated engagement with mindful awareness gradually changes the very fabric of your experience. Your nervous system learns new possibilities through repetition and consistency, rather than through force or dramatic intervention. Like learning to speak a new language, fluency comes through patient practice rather than sudden revelation. As your practice deepens, you might begin to notice what teachers call the interconnectedness of all experience. The breath you're consciously taking connects you to the plants that produce oxygen and the vast atmospheric systems that circulate air around the planet. The sensations you're meeting with acceptance are part of the same awareness that exists in every conscious being. The compassion you're offering to your own experience contributes to the overall compassion available in the world. This recognition of interconnectedness naturally leads to what Buddhist psychology calls the expansion of identity. Instead of seeing yourself as an isolated individual struggling alone with personal problems, you begin to recognize yourself as part of a vast web of life, in which healing and suffering are shared experiences. Your individual healing contributes to collective healing, just as your personal suffering is held within the larger context of universal human experience. In a monastery in ancient Tibet, there was a practice called the meditation of exchanging self and other, where practitioners would imagine taking on the suffering of others while offering their own peace and healing in return. Western students often initially recoiled from this practice, fearing it would overwhelm them or make them take on burdens they couldn't handle. But the master explained that this practice was actually based on a profound understanding of how healing really works. When you truly understand that there is no separate self, he taught, you realize that the suffering of others and your own suffering arise from the same sources of ignorance, fear, and disconnection from our true nature. When you heal these patterns within yourself, you're simultaneously healing them in the larger field of consciousness. When you generate genuine compassion for your own pain, you're developing the capacity to hold space for others' pain without being overwhelmed by it. The students discovered that practicing this expansion of compassion didn't deplete them, but actually increased their resilience. When they stopped seeing their personal struggles as uniquely terrible and began recognizing them as variations on universal human themes, their suffering felt less isolating and more workable. They could draw strength from the recognition that countless others had faced similar challenges and found ways to heal and grow. This expansion of perspective becomes particularly powerful when working with what Buddhist teachers call the wisdom of impermanence. Every sensation, every emotion, every thought, every circumstance is constantly changing. The pain you feel in this moment is not the same pain you felt an hour ago, even if it seems similar. The anxiety that feels so solid and permanent is actually a flowing process of sensations, thoughts, and reactions that are in constant flux. Understanding impermanence isn't about dismissing the reality of difficult experiences by saying they'll pass. It's about recognizing that within every moment of suffering are the seeds of transformation. Your body is continuously healing itself, replacing old cells with new ones, repairing damage, adapting to challenges. Your nervous system is constantly learning, forming new neural pathways, releasing patterns that no longer serve. Your capacity for wisdom and compassion is always expanding, even when you can't feel it directly. There's a beautiful meditation practice from the Zen tradition called watching the arising and passing of phenomena. Practitioners sit quietly and simply observe the constant flow of experience without trying to hold on to pleasant moments or push away unpleasant ones. They watch thoughts appear and disappear. Sensations arise and fade. Emotions emerge and dissolve. Through this practice, they develop what's called the wisdom eye, the ability to see the fluid, impermanent nature of all experience. You can experiment with this practice right now. Sit comfortably and close your eyes. For the next few minutes, simply observe whatever arises in your awareness without engaging with it or trying to change it. Notice how thoughts bubble up from nowhere and then vanish. Observe how physical sensations shift and change from moment to moment. Watch emotions appear, intensify, and then fade away. See if you can rest in the awareness that observes all this activity without being disturbed by any of it. This practice develops what Buddhist psychology calls equanimity, the ability to remain centered and peaceful, regardless of what's happening in your immediate experience. Equanimity isn't indifference or emotional numbness. It's a quality of awareness that can hold both joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, success and failure with equal grace. When you develop equanimity, you stop being at the mercy of constantly changing circumstances and find a stability that comes from within rather than from external conditions. As your understanding of impermanence deepens, you might begin to experience what teachers call the relief of not having to fix everything. If everything is constantly changing anyway, then the situations you're struggling with don't need to be permanently resolved before you can be at peace. You can be okay in the middle of uncertainty. You can feel peaceful even when problems remain unsolved. You can experience joy even when your life isn't perfect. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on positive change. It means recognizing the difference between skillful action that arises from wisdom and peace, and desperate action that arises from the belief that you must fix everything before you can be happy. When you're not driven by the anxiety of having to control outcomes, you often make better decisions and take more effective action because you're responding from clarity rather than reactivity. The ninth understanding that emerges from deepening practice is what Buddhist teachers call the recognition of your own Buddha nature. This isn't a religious concept that requires you to become a Buddhist. Buddha nature refers to the inherent capacity for wisdom, compassion, and peace that exists within every human being. It's the part of you that can observe your thoughts without being completely identified with them, the part that can feel pain without being destroyed by it, the part that can extend kindness even when you're hurting. Buddha nature isn't something you need to develop or acquire. It's something you need to uncover, like clearing dust from a mirror that has always been perfectly reflective underneath. All the practices we've been exploring work by removing the obstacles that obscure your natural wisdom and compassion. The stress, trauma, and conditioning that create suffering are like clouds passing through the sky. They're real, and they affect your experience, but they don't change the fundamental clarity of the sky itself. In a monastery in ancient Japan, a student approached her teacher in great distress. "Master, I've been practicing for years, but I still get angry. I still worry. I still feel overwhelmed by life's challenges. When will I finally become enlightened and be free from all these problems?" The master smiled compassionately and pointed to a lotus flower growing in the monastery pond. "Look at this lotus," she said. "Its roots are in the mud at the bottom of the pond, its stem grows through murky water, and yet it blooms in pristine beauty above the surface. The lotus doesn't become beautiful by rejecting the mud and water. It transforms them into the very substance of its beauty. Your anger, your worry, your challenges are the mud from which your wisdom grows. Enlightenment isn't the absence of human experience. It's the ability to transform any experience into the cultivation of greater love and understanding. This teaching points to a revolutionary understanding of what healing actually means. It's not about becoming a person who never experiences difficulty, never feels strong emotions, never faces challenging circumstances. It's about developing the capacity to meet whatever arises with increasing wisdom, compassion, and skill. Your most difficult experiences become teachers that strengthen your ability to help others facing similar struggles. As this understanding begins to integrate into your daily life, you might notice a shift in how you view your personal history. Experiences that once felt like evidence of damage or failure begin to reveal themselves as crucial elements in the development of your capacity for wisdom and compassion. The trauma that felt like it nearly destroyed you may have also cracked you open in ways that allowed more light to enter. The depression that felt like a curse may have taught you about the preciousness of joy and the importance of mental health. The physical illness that felt like betrayal by your body may have initiated you into deeper appreciation for life and greater empathy for others who suffer. This reframe isn't about denying the real pain these experiences caused or suggesting that suffering is inherently good. It's about recognizing that your response to difficulty has the power to transform even the most challenging experiences into sources of strength and wisdom. This transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires the conscious choice to meet your experience with the kind of awareness and compassion these Buddhist practices cultivate. The 10th understanding that emerges from sustained practice is what teachers call the natural arising of service. When you're no longer consumed by your own unprocessed pain and anxiety, energy that was tied up in internal struggle becomes available for engaging with the world in more helpful ways. This isn't about forcing yourself to help others before you've attended to your own healing needs. It's about the spontaneous emergence of care and helpfulness that occurs when you're functioning from a place of greater balance and peace. There's a beautiful teaching story about a student who asked her master when she would know that her practice was mature. The master replied, "When helping others feels as natural as breathing, when you extend kindness without thinking about it as a spiritual practice, when your first response to others' suffering is compassion rather than judgment or self-protection. The fruit of true practice is not personal perfection, but the natural overflow of wisdom and love into the world around you." This service doesn't have to take dramatic forms. It might be as simple as listening more patiently to a friend who's struggling, speaking more kindly to cashiers and service workers, or maintaining your own well-being so consistently that you become a source of calm in stressful environments. When you're not constantly overwhelmed by your own reactive patterns, you have more capacity to show up for others with presence and helpfulness. As these deeper understandings begin to weave together with the foundational practices of conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, and gratitude cultivation, you may begin to experience what Buddhist teachers call the seamless life. This isn't a life without challenges or difficulties, but a life where spiritual practice and ordinary living become integrated rather than separate activities. You don't have to set aside special time to be mindful, because mindfulness becomes your natural way of engaging with whatever you're doing. You don't have to work at being compassionate, because compassion arises spontaneously from your growing understanding of shared humanity. You don't have to remember to breathe consciously, because conscious breathing becomes as automatic as unconscious breathing once was. This integration represents the mature fruition of Buddhist healing practices, not as techniques you apply to fix problems, but as expressions of your natural wisdom and compassion. The path that began with learning to breathe mindfully and speak to yourself with kindness gradually reveals itself as a return to your most authentic way of being, a way that serves not only your own healing, but the healing of everyone whose life you touch. This seamless integration of practice into daily living opens the doorway to what Buddhist masters have called the great intimacy, a way of being so present and connected to each moment that the artificial separation between self and world begins to dissolve. You're no longer someone who practices mindfulness occasionally, but someone whose very presence embodies mindful awareness. You're no longer someone who does compassion practices, but someone who has become a natural expression of compassion itself. This transformation doesn't happen through striving or self-improvement in the conventional sense. It occurs through what the ancient teachings call the gradual wearing away of everything that is not essentially you. Like a sculpture that emerges as the artist removes everything that is not the intended form, your authentic nature reveals itself as you release the patterns of reactivity, defense, and unconsciousness that have obscured your inherent wholeness. In a mountain monastery in ancient Kashmir, there lived a master who was renowned for her extraordinary ordinariness. Students would travel great distances expecting to find someone who radiated obvious spiritual power or performed miraculous feats. Instead, they found a woman who chopped vegetables with complete presence, swept floors with total attention, and listened to visitors with such genuine interest that they felt truly seen for perhaps the first time in their lives. When students asked about her secret, she would laugh gently and say, "There is no secret, only the willingness to be completely where you are with whatever is happening."
When I chop vegetables, I am intimately present with the knife, the carrot, the cutting board, the sound of chopping. When I sweep, I feel the broom in my hands. Notice the dust particles dancing in the sunlight. Appreciate the opportunity to care for this space.
When someone speaks to me, I listen with my whole being, not just my ears. One particularly earnest student pressed further. "But Master, surely there must be some special technique or advanced practice that creates such presence." The master paused in her vegetable chopping and held up a simple radish. This radish has been growing in the earth for months, drawing nutrients from soil, water, and sunlight. It didn't try to become a radish. It simply expressed its radish nature moment by moment, cell by cell, until it became fully itself. Your Buddha nature is like this radish nature. It doesn't need to be created or achieved. It needs to be allowed, moment by moment, breath by breath, until you become fully yourself. This teaching points to one of the most liberating discoveries in Buddhist healing work. You don't need to become someone different or better than who you are. You need to become more fully who you already are, beneath all the conditioning, trauma, and defensive patterns that have accumulated over the years. The practices of conscious breathing, loving awareness, compassionate dialogue with yourself, and the others we've explored work by creating space for your authentic nature to emerge, rather than trying to impose an artificial spiritual personality on top of your existing patterns. As this understanding deepens, many practitioners discover what teachers call the paradox of effortless effort. The more you try to force healing, the more elusive it becomes. But the more you create gentle, consistent conditions for healing to occur naturally, the more profound the transformation. It's like the difference between trying to fall asleep by commanding yourself to sleep versus creating the conditions that naturally invite sleep. A dark, quiet room, comfortable temperature, relaxed body, peaceful mind. Your nervous system operates according to similar principles. It heals most effectively when it feels safe to let down its guard, when it's not being forced or rushed, when it's met with patience and acceptance rather than impatience and criticism. The practices we've been exploring work by establishing this felt sense of safety in your relationship with your own experience. There's a beautiful teaching from the Tibetan tradition about what they call the ground of being, the fundamental awareness that exists before any particular thoughts, emotions, or sensations arise. This ground is always present, like the sky that remains unchanged whether it holds storm clouds or clear blue. All of your experiences, pleasant and unpleasant, arise within this ground and eventually dissolve back into it. When you learn to rest in this ground of being, rather than being completely identified with whatever is arising within it, you discover a stability and peace that no external circumstance can disturb. You can feel intense sadness without being overwhelmed by it, because you recognize yourself as the space in which sadness arises, rather than being the sadness itself. You can experience physical pain without falling into despair, because you know yourself as the awareness that observes pain, rather than being completely defined by the painful experience. This shift in identity from the contents of experience to the awareness that holds all experience represents one of the most profound healing possibilities in Buddhist psychology. When you're no longer completely at the mercy of whatever thoughts, emotions, or sensations happen to be present, you have the freedom to respond rather than react, to choose your actions based on wisdom rather than being driven by unconscious patterns. A student once asked a Zen master how to deal with the intense grief she felt after losing her beloved partner. She expected teachings about letting go or moving on, but instead the master said, "Don't try to get rid of the grief. Learn to be larger than the grief. Your capacity to love was so great that it created this profound sorrow. Let yourself be as vast as your love, and you'll discover that you're large enough to hold both the love and the grief without being destroyed by either." This teaching illuminates a revolutionary approach to difficult emotions. Instead of seeing them as problems to be eliminated, Buddhist healing recognizes them as expressions of your capacity to feel deeply. The intensity of your anxiety may reflect the depth of your caring. The strength of your anger might indicate the clarity of your values. The profound nature of your sadness could reveal the vastness of your heart. When you stop fighting against these intense emotions and instead learn to expand your capacity to hold them with awareness, they often transform naturally. Anxiety held in spacious awareness may reveal itself as excitement or creative energy. Anger embraced with consciousness might transform into clear boundaries or passion for justice. Grief, met with infinite tenderness, can become a pathway to greater compassion for all beings who have lost what they loved. This expansion of your capacity to hold difficult experience without being overwhelmed by it extends naturally into your relationships with others. When you're no longer consumed by your own unprocessed emotional material, you have more availability to be genuinely present with other people's struggles, without immediately trying to fix them or being triggered by their pain. In the ancient monasteries, this quality was called great compassion, not because it involved grand gestures of service, but because it represented the ability to be with suffering without being destroyed by it, to offer presence without trying to eliminate discomfort, to love without conditions or expectations of return. This compassion arises naturally when you've learned to hold your own difficult experiences with kindness rather than resistance. There's a teaching story about a monk who was known throughout the region for his ability to sit with people who were dying. Family members would seek him out when conventional comfort seemed inadequate, when words felt empty and standard consolations rang hollow. What they found wasn't someone who offered false reassurance or spiritual platitudes, but someone who could be completely present with the reality of death and loss without flinching away. When asked how he developed this capacity, the monk explained, "I learned to be with my own mortality first. I spent years sitting with my own fear of death, my own grief about impermanence, my own terror of the unknown. When I could hold these experiences with tenderness instead of denial, I naturally became able to hold the same experiences when they arose in others." This illustrates a fundamental principle in Buddhist healing work. Your capacity to be with others' difficult experiences is directly related to your capacity to be with your own difficult experiences. If you habitually run away from your own pain, you'll unconsciously encourage others to suppress or deny theirs. But if you've learned to meet your own darkness with compassion, you can offer that same quality of presence to others. As this understanding integrates into your daily interactions, you might notice that people begin responding to you differently. They may feel safer sharing their authentic struggles rather than presenting only their polished public personas. They might seek you out when they need someone who can listen, without immediately offering advice or trying to cheer them up. You become what teachers call a healing presence, not because you have special powers, but because you've learned to be genuinely present with reality as it is, rather than as you wish it would be. This quality of presence extends beyond relationships with other people to your relationship with the natural world, with your work, with the ordinary activities that fill your days. When you bring the same quality of intimate attention to washing dishes that you bring to formal meditation practice, dishwashing becomes a form of moving meditation. When you drive with the same presence you cultivate in sitting practice, your commute becomes an opportunity for mindfulness rather than just time to endure. There's a famous story from the Zen tradition about a student who complained to his master that his work in the monastery kitchen was preventing him from pursuing higher spiritual practices. The master assigned him to pay even closer attention to his kitchen duties, to notice the temperature of the water when washing dishes, to feel the weight of each pot when moving it from shelf to stove, to observe the changing colors of vegetables as they cooked. Initially resistant, the student began following these instructions with growing fascination. He discovered that the kitchen work he had dismissed as mundane was actually rich with opportunities for the same quality of awareness he had been seeking in formal meditation. The sound of chopping vegetables became as instructive as temple bells. The process of kneading bread dough taught him about patience and attention as effectively as hours of sitting practice. When he returned to the master with this understanding, the teacher smiled and said, "Now you're beginning to understand that awakening doesn't happen in spite of ordinary life, but through complete engagement with ordinary life. The Buddha nature you seek in meditation hall is the same Buddha nature that washes dishes and sweeps floors. When you bring sacred attention to mundane activities, all activities become sacred." This integration of sacred and ordinary represents one of the most practical fruits of Buddhist healing practice. Life stops being divided into spiritual time and regular time, healing work and everything else. Instead, every moment becomes an opportunity to embody the qualities of presence, compassion, and wisdom that these practices cultivate. As this embodied integration deepens, many practitioners discover what teachers call the effortless maintaining of awareness. In the beginning, staying present requires conscious effort and frequent reminding. You have to remember to breathe mindfully. Remember to speak to yourself with kindness. Remember to notice when you're falling into unconscious reactivity. But gradually, through consistent practice, these ways of being become as automatic as the unconscious patterns they're replacing. You don't have to work at staying present, because presence becomes your natural state. You don't have to force compassion, because compassion arises spontaneously from your understanding of shared humanity. You don't have to remember to breathe consciously, because conscious breathing becomes your default way of moving through the world. This shift from effortful practice to effortless embodiment represents what Buddhist psychology calls the maturation of the path. You've moved from doing Buddhist practices to being someone who naturally expresses Buddhist understanding. This doesn't mean you've reached some final destination or achieved perfection. It means you've developed enough stability in wisdom and compassion that they continue to operate even when you're not consciously focusing on them. The healing that emerges from this level of integration extends far beyond personal well-being. When you're functioning from this place of embodied presence and natural compassion, you become what teachers call a beneficial influence in the world. Your very presence becomes healing for others, not because you're trying to heal them, but because you're no longer adding your own unprocessed reactivity to whatever situations you encounter. In environments filled with stress and conflict, you become a source of calm. In relationships characterized by defensiveness and misunderstanding, you offer the possibility of genuine communication. In communities struggling with division and judgment, you embody the possibility of acceptance and understanding. This contribution happens naturally, without effort or self-consciousness, as the spontaneous expression of your own healing and awakening. There's a teaching from the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh about a student who asked how individual healing practice could possibly address the vast suffering in the world. The master replied by describing a pebble dropped into a still pond. When the pebble touches the water, it creates ripples that extend far beyond the point of impact. Your healing creates similar ripples of peace and understanding that touch lives in ways you may never know about. Every moment of genuine presence, every gesture of authentic kindness, every breath taken in conscious awareness contributes to the healing of the whole world. This understanding transforms healing from a purely personal endeavor into a form of service to life itself. When you heal the patterns of reactivity, fear, and unconsciousness within yourself, you're simultaneously healing those patterns in the larger field of human consciousness. When you develop the capacity to meet difficulty with wisdom instead of adding more conflict to already painful situations, you're contributing to the possibility that others might discover this same capacity. The practices we've explored throughout this journey, conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, gratitude cultivation, and the integration of all these into seamless daily living create what Buddhist teachers call a mandala of awakening. Each element supports and enhances all the others, creating a comprehensive approach to healing that addresses not just individual symptoms, but the fundamental patterns that create suffering. This mandala continues to deepen and expand throughout your lifetime, not as a project to be completed, but as an ongoing expression of your commitment to conscious living. Each day offers new opportunities to embody these understandings more fully, to meet whatever arises with greater skill and compassion, to contribute to the healing and awakening that wants to happen both within yourself and in the world around you. This ongoing deepening reveals itself in increasingly subtle ways as you continue walking this path of conscious healing. What once required deliberate attention begins to operate as naturally as your heartbeat. The quality of presence that you initially had to cultivate through specific practices starts to inform how you move through grocery stores, how you respond to unexpected phone calls, how you meet the small irritations and large challenges that weave through ordinary days. There's a teaching story from a Tibetan monastery about a student who returned to visit his teacher after many years of practice in the world beyond the monastery walls. The teacher observed him quietly for several days, watching how he interacted with other visitors, how he helped with daily tasks, how he responded when someone accidentally spilled tea on his robes. "Tell me," the teacher finally said, "what has your practice taught you?" The student began to describe the meditation techniques he'd mastered, the insights he'd gained, the emotional patterns he'd learned to recognize and transform. The teacher listened patiently, then smiled and said, "I can see all of that in how you wiped up the spilled tea without a trace of irritation, in how you listened to that difficult visitor this morning without trying to fix or change her, in how your presence seems to calm the monastery cat. Your practice has become who you are, rather than something you do." This transformation from doing practice to being practice represents what Buddhist psychology recognizes as the natural evolution of healing work. The techniques and approaches that initially require conscious effort gradually integrate into your way of being until they're no longer separate activities, but expressions of your essential nature. This integration often reveals itself first in your relationship with your own body. You might notice that you naturally breathe more deeply without having to remember breathing exercises. Your posture might improve spontaneously as your nervous system learns to hold less defensive tension. You might find yourself moving more gracefully, not because you've studied movement, but because internal conflict no longer creates the jerky, disconnected way of inhabiting your physical form that characterizes chronic stress. The body holds memory not just of trauma and tension, but also of every moment of peace, safety, and love you've ever experienced. As healing practices help you release what no longer serves, they simultaneously create space for your system to remember and return to its natural state of ease and aliveness. Your body begins to recall what it felt like before it learned it needed to be constantly braced against potential threat. In ancient Chinese medicine, which deeply influenced Buddhist healing approaches, there's a concept called the original qi, the fundamental life energy that exists in perfect balance before it becomes disturbed by stress, illness, or emotional turmoil. This original qi isn't something that needs to be imported from outside, but something that can be uncovered by removing the obstacles that obscure its natural flow. The breathing practices we explored work by releasing restrictions in your respiratory system that may have been present for so long you forgot what unrestricted breathing feels like. The conscious rest practices help your nervous system remember states of deep relaxation that may have been inaccessible for years. The mindful movement approaches allow your body to rediscover its innate wisdom about how to move in ways that support rather than strain your physical structure. As these practices continue to work at progressively deeper levels, many people experience what teachers call layers of release. You might work with conscious breathing for months and feel like you've reached a new level of respiratory freedom, only to discover another layer of held breath that's ready to release. You might feel like you've processed a particular emotional pattern completely, then find yourself meeting an even deeper aspect of the same pattern with greater capacity and understanding. This layered process reflects the Buddhist understanding that healing happens in spiral rather than linear fashion. You don't simply move from unconsciousness to consciousness, from reactivity to responsiveness, from suffering to peace. Instead, you spiral through similar themes at progressively deeper levels, each time with greater capacity to meet what arises with wisdom and compassion. A student once complained to her teacher about this spiral nature of healing, frustrated that issues she thought she'd resolved kept appearing in new forms. The teacher took her to the monastery garden, where a large spiral shell lay on a stone bench. This shell was created by a small sea creature over many years, she explained. Each chamber represents a stage of the animal's growth. As it grew larger, it didn't abandon the previous chambers but built upon them, creating a larger spiral that encompassed everything that came before. Your healing follows the same pattern, the teacher continued. Each time you meet an old pattern with new awareness, you're not failing to progress. You're creating a larger container that can hold more of your experience with greater wisdom. The spiral doesn't repeat itself exactly, but moves through similar territory at a higher level of integration. This understanding helps explain why sustainable healing rarely happens through dramatic breakthrough moments, though such moments certainly occur. More often, healing happens through what teachers call the patient accumulation of moments of consciousness. Each small choice to respond rather than react, each gentle breath taken in the middle of difficulty, each moment of compassion offered to your own struggles, creating a foundation for deeper transformation. The patience required for this kind of healing represents a radical departure from the instant gratification that characterizes much of modern life. In a culture that expects rapid results and quick fixes, the slow, organic pace of genuine healing can feel frustrating or insufficient. But Buddhist wisdom recognizes that the most profound changes happen at the speed of nature, not the speed of human impatience. There's a teaching story about a woman who planted a bamboo seed in her garden and watered it faithfully every day for 4 years without seeing any growth above ground. Neighbors mocked her dedication to what appeared to be dead earth, but in the 5th year, the bamboo suddenly shot up 60 feet in 6 weeks, growing faster than any other plant in her garden. The bamboo wasn't doing nothing during those first 4 years, she explained to her amazed neighbors. It was developing a root system strong enough to support the rapid growth that would come later. My healing practice works the same way. The daily attention to breathing, the small moments of self-compassion, the gentle movement and conscious rest may not look like much from the outside, but they're creating an internal foundation that will support whatever growth wants to emerge. This understanding of timing in healing work becomes particularly important when dealing with what Buddhist psychology calls the deeper waters of practice. As your capacity for presence and self-compassion develops, you may find yourself able to meet aspects of your experience that were previously too overwhelming to approach directly. Memories that have been stored in your body for years or even decades may surface during periods of conscious rest or mindful movement. Emotions that you learned to suppress in childhood may emerge during breathing practices. Physical sensations related to old injuries or traumas may intensify temporarily as your nervous system finally feels safe enough to process experiences it has been holding. These deeper layers of release require what teachers call the warrior's tenderness, the courage to meet intense experience with an open heart rather than closing down or turning away. This isn't about being tough or stoic, but about developing the capacity to stay present with difficulty while maintaining fundamental self-compassion. In the ancient healing traditions of Tibet, practitioners would sometimes experience what they called the arising of the demons, periods when all their most challenging patterns seemed to intensify before resolving into greater peace. Modern psychology recognizes similar phenomena in therapeutic work, where progress is often preceded by temporary increases in symptoms as unconscious material becomes conscious. The key to navigating these deeper waters lies in maintaining what Buddhist teachers call the view, the understanding that whatever arises in your experience is workable material rather than evidence of failure or pathology. Intense emotions are not problems to be eliminated, but energies to be felt and integrated. Physical symptoms are not necessarily signs of new illness, but often the body's way of releasing old patterns that no longer serve. This view requires discernment, of course. Some physical symptoms do require medical attention, and some emotional states may benefit from professional therapeutic support. Buddhist healing practices are meant to complement rather than replace appropriate medical and psychological care. The wisdom lies in learning to distinguish between the temporary intensification that often accompanies healing and the warning signs that indicate you need additional support. There's a beautiful teaching from a Vietnamese monastery about a student who became frightened during a period of intense emotional release that accompanied her deepening practice. Childhood memories were surfacing, her body felt raw and sensitive, and she questioned whether she was strong enough to continue on the healing path. Her teacher listened compassionately and then shared a story about a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. During the metamorphosis, he explained, there comes a moment when the caterpillar's body completely dissolves into what scientists call imaginal soup. If you opened the chrysalis at that moment, you would find no recognizable structure, nothing that looks like either a caterpillar or a butterfly. Yet this apparent destruction is actually the necessary stage that allows the butterfly to emerge. Your healing may sometimes feel like this dissolution, he continued. Old ways of organizing your experience are breaking down to make room for new patterns that serve you better. This can feel chaotic and frightening, but it's often the sign that your deepest healing is taking place. The key is learning to trust the process even when you can't see where it's leading. This trust in the healing process represents one of the most challenging and important aspects of Buddhist healing work. It requires developing faith, not in any external authority, but in the fundamental intelligence of your own system to move toward greater health and wholeness when given the right conditions. Your body knows how to heal cuts and broken bones without your conscious direction. Your nervous system knows how to return to balance after stress when it feels safe to do so. Your emotional system knows how to process difficult experiences when they're met with acceptance rather than resistance. Buddhist healing practices work by creating the conditions that allow these natural healing processes to operate more effectively. As this trust deepens, you may begin to experience what teachers call the effortless effort, the paradoxical state, where profound transformation happens with less force and struggle than you initially imagined would be necessary. This doesn't mean that healing becomes easy or that you no longer need to show up for your practice. It means that you learn to work with the current of your own healing rather than against it. The practices of conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, and gratitude cultivation create what might be called a healing ecosystem within your daily experience. Each practice supports the others, creating conditions where natural healing processes can operate more effectively. Your conscious breathing supports better sleep, which enhances your emotional regulation, which makes it easier to maintain compassionate self-dialogue, which creates space for deeper rest, which allows for more intuitive movement, which facilitates the release of stored tension, which opens your heart to greater gratitude for your body's wisdom. The practices reinforce each other in an upward spiral of increasing health and well-being. This systemic approach to healing reflects the Buddhist understanding that you are not a collection of separate parts that need to be fixed individually, but an integrated whole where changes in one aspect of your experience naturally influence all other aspects. When you change your relationship with your breath, you change your relationship with your emotions. When you change how you speak to yourself internally, you change how you relate to others. When you change your capacity to rest deeply, you change your ability to engage actively. As these interconnected changes continue to develop and mature, they often lead to what practitioners describe as a fundamental shift in their relationship with life itself. Challenges that once felt overwhelming become workable difficulties. Relationships that were sources of constant stress become opportunities for practicing patience and compassion. Physical limitations or health issues become teachers that deepen your appreciation for what is still possible, rather than sources of resentment about what has been lost. This shift doesn't happen through positive thinking or denial of real difficulties. It emerges from the gradual development of what Buddhist psychology calls unshakable presence, the capacity to remain fundamentally okay regardless of what circumstances you're facing. This presence isn't dependent on having favorable conditions, but arises from the deep knowing that your essential nature is larger than any particular experience you might be having. The cultivation of this unshakable presence represents perhaps the deepest fruit of Buddhist healing practices. It's not about becoming invulnerable or transcending human experience, but about discovering a stability within yourself that can hold both joy and sorrow, success and failure, health and illness with equal grace. From this place of fundamental okayness, you can engage fully with whatever life presents while maintaining your essential peace and dignity. This unshakable presence doesn't announce itself with fanfare or dramatic revelations. Instead, it reveals itself in the quiet moments when you realize that your first response to unexpected news is curiosity rather than panic, when you notice that criticism from others creates space for reflection rather than immediate defensiveness, when you find yourself naturally offering patience to someone who is clearly struggling even though their behavior is difficult to be around. The development of this presence occurs so gradually that you might not recognize it until someone else points it out. A friend might comment that you seem more peaceful lately, or a family member might notice that you don't get as rattled by the same situations that used to throw you into reactivity. These external observations often provide the first clear indication that something fundamental has shifted in how you meet life's inevitable challenges. In a monastery nestled in the foothills of ancient Nepal, there lived a monk who had been practicing for over 30 years. Visitors often remarked on his extraordinary calm, his ability to remain centered whether he was dealing with monastery administration, counseling troubled students, or sitting beside someone who was dying. When asked about the source of his equanimity, he would always seem genuinely surprised by the question. "I don't feel particularly calm," he would say with sincere puzzlement. "I feel everything just as intensely as anyone else. I experience sadness when there is loss, frustration when plans don't work out, physical discomfort when my old body protests against too much sitting. The difference, I suppose, is that I no longer experience these feelings as problems that need to be solved immediately. They're simply what's happening right now, and right now is always workable." This response illustrates one of the most important understandings that emerges from sustained Buddhist healing practice. Unshakable presence doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or transcending human experience. It means developing the capacity to remain fundamentally stable while fully experiencing whatever emotions, sensations, or circumstances arise in your life. This stability comes not from suppressing difficult experiences, but from expanding your capacity to hold them without being overwhelmed. It's like the difference between being a small boat tossed around by ocean waves and being a large ship that can ride the same waves with grace and stability. The waves haven't changed, but your capacity to navigate them has fundamentally transformed. As this expanded capacity continues to develop, many practitioners notice what teachers call the natural arising of appropriate response. Instead of reacting automatically from conditioned patterns, you begin to respond from a place of clarity about what each situation actually requires. This doesn't mean you become passive or lose your ability to take strong action when necessary.
It means your actions arise from wisdom rather than reactivity, from choice rather than compulsion. There's a teaching story from ancient Vietnam about a village that was regularly raided by bandits.
The villagers lived in constant fear, never knowing when the next attack might come. Most responded by becoming increasingly defensive, building higher walls, sleeping with weapons, viewing every stranger with suspicion. But one old woman took a different approach. Instead of fortifying her house, she began leaving small offerings of food and water by the road where the bandits passed. When neighbors questioned her apparent foolishness, she replied, "These men steal because they believe the world is hostile, and they must take what they need through force. I want to show them that kindness exists, that not everyone will treat them as enemies." Initially, the bandits ignored her offerings or destroyed them out of suspicion, but gradually, some began to take the food. Eventually, one young bandit approached her directly to thank her. Through their conversations, she learned that he and his companions had turned to raiding only after losing their families and farms to war. With her encouragement, several of the bandits eventually settled in the village and became productive community members. "I didn't stop the raiding through force or cleverness," she explained years later. I stopped it by responding to the deeper need underneath the harmful behavior. When we meet people's actions with the same energy they're bringing, we just create more of what we're trying to prevent. But when we respond from a different level entirely, we create the possibility for genuine transformation. This story illustrates how unshakable presence naturally leads to what Buddhist psychology calls skillful means, the ability to respond to each situation in whatever way will be most beneficial, rather than simply reacting from your own emotional state. Skillful means requires both wisdom to see what's actually needed and the emotional stability to provide it, even when it's not what you initially want to offer. The development of skillful means becomes particularly evident in your relationships with family members, colleagues, and others with whom you have ongoing contact. People who have known you for years may be surprised by your new responses to familiar patterns of interaction. Where you once would have met criticism with defensiveness, you might now respond with genuine curiosity about their perspective. Where you previously would have tried to fix someone's problems, you might now offer presence and listening without trying to change their experience. These shifts often create temporary confusion in your relationships as others adjust to your changed responses. Family members might escalate their usual tactics when their previous methods of getting your attention or triggering your reactivity no longer work. Colleagues might test whether your new calmness is authentic or just a temporary phase. This testing period requires what teachers call compassionate firmness, the ability to maintain your new patterns of response while remaining kind and understanding about others' confusion. In a teaching center in ancient Japan, a student complained to her master about the resistance she was encountering from family members as her practice deepened. "They seem to want me to stay the same," she said. "When I don't get upset about things that used to trigger me, they act like something is wrong with me. They keep trying to provoke me back into my old reactions." The master listened thoughtfully and then said, "Imagine that you've been participating in a particular dance with your family members for many years. Everyone knows the steps, everyone has their role, and the dance feels familiar even when it's painful. Now you've learnt new steps, but your dance partners haven't. They keep expecting you to move in the old patterns because that's the only dance they know. Your job," he continued, "is not to force them to learn your new steps, but to keep dancing in the way that feels most authentic to you, while remaining loving toward their confusion. Eventually, they may become curious about your new dance and want to learn it themselves. Or they may prefer to keep dancing in the old way, in which case you'll need to decide how much you want to participate in dances that no longer serve your well-being." This teaching points to one of the challenges that can arise as Buddhist healing practices mature. As you develop greater emotional stability and clarity, you may find yourself less willing to participate in relationships or situations that depend on unconscious reactivity, drama, or mutual dysfunction. This doesn't mean becoming judgmental or superior, but it does mean making increasingly conscious choices about how you spend your time and energy. The changes that occur through sustained healing practice naturally lead to what teachers call the refinement of associations. You may find yourself drawn to people who share your interest in conscious living, who support your growth, rather than encouraging you to remain stuck in old patterns. You might become less interested in activities that numb awareness or create artificial stimulation, and more attracted to pursuits that nourish your sense of presence and aliveness. This refinement happens organically rather than through forced effort. As your nervous system becomes accustomed to states of peace and clarity, environments and relationships that depend on chronic stress or unconsciousness begin to feel uncomfortable in a way that motivates natural changes. You don't have to force yourself to avoid toxic situations. They begin to feel toxic to your system in ways that make avoidance a natural choice rather than a moral obligation. There's a beautiful teaching from the Tibetan tradition about a meditator who spent years practicing in a cave high in the mountains. When he finally returned to the valley, his friends expected him to be detached from worldly concerns, perhaps even antisocial. Instead, they found him more engaged with life than ever before, but his engagement had a quality of freedom that hadn't been present before his retreat. "Before I practiced," he explained, "I was like a person caught in a spider web, struggling desperately to break free, but only becoming more entangled. Now I'm like a bird that can fly through the same web without getting caught. I can engage with all the same activities and relationships, but I'm no longer trapped by them. I participate by choice rather than compulsion. This freedom of engagement represents one of the most mature fruits of Buddhist healing work. You don't withdraw from life, but learn to participate in it without losing yourself, to care deeply without being destroyed when things don't go as hoped, to love fully while accepting the impermanence that characterizes all relationships and experiences. The practices of conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, and gratitude cultivation continue to deepen and refine throughout this process. But their function evolves from techniques you use to restore balance to expressions of your natural way of being. Your breath becomes naturally conscious without effort. Your relationship with physical sensation becomes naturally loving. Your inner dialogue becomes naturally compassionate. This evolution from technique to embodiment often surprises practitioners who expect to always need formal practice periods or specific exercises to maintain their well-being. While regular periods of formal practice often remain valuable throughout your life, the most important healing happens through the gradual integration of conscious awareness into all aspects of daily living. As this integration continues to mature, many people discover what teachers call the seamless day, where every activity becomes an opportunity to embody the qualities of presence, compassion, and wisdom that healing practices cultivate. Cooking dinner becomes mindfulness practice. Listening to a friend becomes compassion meditation. Walking to work becomes moving meditation. The boundaries between spiritual practice and ordinary living dissolve into one continuous expression of awakened awareness. This seamless quality extends into your relationship with challenges and difficulties. Instead of seeing problems as interruptions to your peace or obstacles to your happiness, you begin to recognize them as opportunities to deepen your capacity for skillful response. Each difficult person becomes a teacher in patience. Every unexpected change becomes instruction in flexibility. All disappointments become invitations to practice acceptance while maintaining appropriate action. The transformation of your relationship with difficulty represents perhaps the most practical fruit of Buddhist healing work. Life continues to present the same range of experiences it always has. Illness, loss, conflict, uncertainty, change, but your capacity to meet these experiences without adding unnecessary suffering increases dramatically. You develop what teachers call the warrior's heart, courage that allows you to face whatever comes without armor or weapons, protected only by your commitment to respond from love rather than fear. This warrior's heart doesn't develop through toughening yourself or building emotional walls. It emerges from the repeated discovery that you can survive intense experiences without being destroyed by them, that you can feel pain without falling apart, that you can face uncertainty without losing your fundamental sense of being okay. Each time you meet difficulty with presence rather than avoidance, you prove to yourself that you're more resilient than you previously believed. The accumulated evidence of your own resilience creates what psychology calls self-efficacy, the deep knowing that you can handle whatever life presents. This knowing doesn't come from believing you'll never face serious challenges, but from the confidence that you have the inner resources to meet challenges skillfully when they arise. This confidence allows you to live more fully because you're not constantly protecting yourself against hypothetical future difficulties. As we continue to explore the deepening dimensions of Buddhist healing work, the next layers reveal how this individual transformation naturally opens into service to others and contribution to the healing of the larger world. The practices that begin as personal healing techniques gradually reveal themselves as preparation for participating in what teachers call the great work of alleviating suffering wherever it's found. When your own nervous system has learned to rest in fundamental stability, when your heart has developed the capacity to hold both joy and sorrow without being overwhelmed by either, when your mind has cultivated the ability to respond rather than react, you discover that extending this same quality of presence to others requires no additional effort. It becomes as automatic as breathing. The ancient Buddhist texts speak of what they call the bodhisattva ideal, the commitment to working for the liberation of all beings from suffering. But this isn't presented as a moral commandment that you should follow out of duty. Instead, it's described as the natural flowering of wisdom and compassion when they reach a certain level of maturity. When you truly understand that your own well-being is intimately connected to the well-being of all life, service stops being something you do and becomes something you are. In a monastery high in the mountains of ancient Bhutan, there lived a master healer who was known throughout the region for her ability to help people with both physical ailments and emotional distress. Travelers would journey for weeks to receive her guidance, expecting to find someone who possessed special powers or secret knowledge. Instead, they encountered a woman who simply listened with such complete attention that people felt heard for perhaps the first time in their lives. When students asked her to teach them her healing techniques, she would smile and say, "There is no technique, only presence." When you are truly present with someone suffering without trying to fix it, analyze it, or make it go away, you create a space where their own healing wisdom can emerge. Most people are not lacking solutions to their problems. They are lacking someone who can sit with them in their difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. She would demonstrate this by inviting students to observe her interactions with visitors. They would watch as she sat quietly with someone describing their struggles, offering no advice, making no suggestions, simply receiving their words with complete attention. Invariably, by the end of these conversations, the visitors would begin to discover insights and possibilities they hadn't been able to access when they were struggling alone. You see, she would explain to her students afterward, healing happens in relationship, not because I am giving them something they lack, but because the quality of presence creates a field where their own inner wisdom can operate more clearly. When someone feels truly seen and accepted, their nervous system relaxes enough to access resources that stress and isolation had made unavailable. This understanding of healing as fundamentally relational represents one of the most important discoveries that emerges from mature Buddhist practice. The same quality of loving awareness that you've learnt to bring to your own difficult experiences becomes a gift you can offer to others simply by maintaining that same presence when they share their struggles with you. This doesn't require special training in counseling or therapy, though such training can certainly enhance your capacity to be helpful. It simply requires the willingness to stay present with another person's experience without immediately trying to change it, solve it, or make them feel better. Most people in distress are not primarily seeking solutions, though they may initially think they are. They are seeking to be witnessed in their experience, to feel less alone with their difficulty, to have their struggle acknowledged as real and understandable. There's a profound teaching story from the Vietnamese Zen tradition about a woman whose child had died unexpectedly. Overwhelmed by grief, she went from teacher to teacher, seeking someone who could take away her pain, or at least explain why such suffering had to exist. Most offered philosophical explanations about karma, impermanence, or the nature of life and death. These teachings, while potentially valuable, felt hollow to her in the midst of her raw grief. Finally, she encountered a master who listened to her story without offering any explanations or teachings at all. Instead, she simply sat with the grieving mother as she wept, occasionally placing a gentle hand on her shoulder or offering her tea. After several hours together, the woman began to feel something shift inside her. Her grief remained as intense as before, but she no longer felt alone with it. "You didn't tell me anything about why my child died," the woman observed. "You didn't explain the meaning of suffering or teach me how to let go of my attachment, yet somehow I feel more at peace than I have since this happened. How is this possible?" The master replied softly, "Sometimes the most healing thing we can offer is the willingness to sit in the darkness with someone until they remember they are not alone. Your grief is sacred. It doesn't need to be explained or fixed. It needs to be honored and held." Years later, the woman became known in her community as someone people sought out when they were facing their own losses. She never gave advice or tried to minimize others' pain. She simply offered the same quality of presence that had been given to her, the willingness to sit with suffering without trying to make it go away. This story illustrates how the healing you receive through Buddhist practices naturally becomes healing you can offer to others. The capacity to stay present with your own difficult emotions develops into the ability to remain present with others' difficult emotions. The compassion you've learned to extend to your own struggles becomes compassion you can offer to anyone who is suffering. As this capacity for healing presence continues to develop, you may find that people begin seeking you out in times of difficulty, even though you haven't advertised yourself as someone who provides guidance or support. There's something in your way of being that communicates safety and acceptance, an absence of judgment that allows others to be authentic about their struggles, rather than having to maintain social facades. This shift in how others relate to you reflects what Buddhist psychology calls the natural radiation of healing presence. When your own system has learned to rest in fundamental okayness, when you're no longer constantly activated by your own unprocessed emotional material, you become what teachers describe as a calm presence in an agitated world. This calmness isn't forced or performed, but arises naturally from your own inner stability. The development of this healing presence often leads to what practitioners discover is a completely different understanding of what it means to help others. Instead of trying to fix people's problems or give them solutions, you learn to create conditions where their own healing wisdom can emerge. Instead of taking responsibility for others' emotional states, you learn to hold space for whatever they're experiencing while maintaining your own centered presence. There's a teaching from ancient Tibet about the difference between what they called rescuer compassion and wise compassion. Rescuer compassion tries to eliminate others' suffering by taking it on yourself, or by frantically working to solve their problems. This kind of compassion, while well-intentioned, often creates dependency and can lead to burnout for the helper and disempowerment for the person receiving help. Wise compassion, by contrast, maintains clear boundaries while offering unlimited presence. It acknowledges others' capacity to heal and grow while providing the support and witnessing that can facilitate that process. Wise compassion recognizes that everyone has an innate wisdom that knows what they need for healing, but that this wisdom sometimes requires the right conditions to emerge. A student once asked a master about this distinction, saying, "But surely, if someone is suffering, the compassionate thing to do is whatever will make them feel better as quickly as possible." The master replied, "If you see someone who has fallen into a pit, rescuer compassion would jump into the pit with them so they don't feel alone. Wise compassion would remain at the edge of the pit and throw down a rope. Both responses come from caring, but only one actually helps the person get out of the pit. This understanding of wise compassion becomes particularly important as you begin to recognize how many people in your life may be struggling with their own versions of the patterns you've been working to heal in yourself. You may notice family members caught in cycles of reactivity, friends trapped in patterns of self-criticism, colleagues overwhelmed by stress and burnout. Your natural impulse might be to share the practices that have been helpful for you, or to try to convince them to approach their difficulties differently. However, the mature expression of Buddhist healing wisdom recognizes that people can only receive what they're ready to receive when they're ready to receive it. Trying to force insights or practices on others, even with the best intentions, often creates resistance and can damage relationships. Instead, the most helpful thing you can usually offer is simply modeling a different way of being while remaining available if and when others become curious about what you're doing differently. This modeling doesn't require dramatic demonstrations or obvious spiritual behavior. It might be as simple as responding to stress with calm presence, rather than adding your own anxiety to an already tense situation. It could involve listening without immediately offering solutions when someone shares a problem with you. It might mean maintaining your own self-care practices, even when others are caught up in crisis or drama. There's a beautiful story from a Zen monastery about a monk who worked in the kitchen feeding hundreds of people daily. He never gave formal teachings or meditation instruction, but students often commented that spending time with him while he cooked was more beneficial than attending lectures. When asked about this, other masters would explain, "Watch how he chops vegetables with complete attention, how he moves through his tasks without hurry or agitation, how he treats each ingredient and each person with equal respect. He is teaching constantly through his way of being." Years later, many students who had worked with this kitchen monk became renowned teachers themselves. When asked about their most influential instruction, They would often mention not specific words or concepts they had learned, but the quality of presence they had absorbed through working alongside someone who embodied the principles he never needed to speak about. This transmission of wisdom through presence rather than words represents one of the most powerful ways that individual healing contributes to collective transformation. Every person who learns to respond rather than react, who develops the capacity to remain centered in challenging circumstances, who cultivates genuine compassion for themselves and others, becomes a source of healing in their family system, workplace, and community. The ripple effects of this individual transformation extend far beyond what you might initially imagine. Your increased emotional stability creates space for family members to relax their own defensive patterns. Your compassionate responses to difficult colleagues may inspire them to question their own reactive habits. Your ability to listen without judgment might provide exactly what a friend needs to work through a challenging decision. These contributions often happen so naturally that you may not even notice them occurring. You're simply being yourself, responding from the clarity and compassion that your healing practices have cultivated, and this way of being creates beneficial effects that spread outward in ways you may never fully know about. In the ancient Buddhist teachings, there's a metaphor about a person carrying a torch while walking through darkness. The torch doesn't try to illuminate anything in particular, but simply by burning brightly, it provides light that helps anyone nearby to see more clearly. Your own healing work functions in a similar way. By maintaining your own clarity and emotional balance, you naturally contribute to the overall clarity and balance available in any situation you encounter. This contribution becomes particularly evident during times of collective stress or crisis. When communities face natural disasters, economic difficulties, social conflicts, or other challenges, people who have developed inner stability become invaluable resources, not because they have special knowledge about how to solve external problems, but because they can remain calm and thinking clearly when others are overwhelmed by fear or reactivity. During such times, your capacity to stay present rather than getting caught up in panic or despair allows you to see possibilities and solutions that might not be visible to those who are in fight or flight mode. Your ability to respond with compassion rather than judgment creates space for others to share information honestly rather than defensively. Your maintained sense of hope and fundamental okayness provides reassurance to others that it's possible to weather difficult circumstances without losing one's essential dignity and humanity. The practices of conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, and gratitude cultivation continue to serve you during challenging times, but their function expands beyond personal regulation to become tools for supporting others. Your conscious breathing can help calm not just your own nervous system, but can provide a stable presence that helps others regulate their anxiety. Your compassionate way of speaking to yourself becomes a model for how others might learn to treat themselves more kindly. As this expansion of your healing presence continues to develop, you may find yourself naturally gravitating toward roles or activities that allow you to contribute to others' well-being. This might involve formal helping professions like counseling, teaching, or healthcare, but it could just as easily manifest as becoming the person in your workplace who others seek out for perspective during difficult times, the family member who helps maintain stability during conflicts, or the community member who organizes support for neighbors facing challenges. The key insight is that this movement towards service doesn't require you to become someone different from who you are. Instead, it involves becoming more fully who you are, while extending the fruits of your own healing work into your relationships and community. The same presence, compassion, and wisdom that have supported your individual healing become gifts you can offer to the collective healing that our world desperately needs. This recognition that your individual healing naturally contributes to collective transformation reveals itself most profoundly in what Buddhist teachers call the understanding of interdependence. As your practice matures, you begin to perceive with increasing clarity that there is no such thing as purely individual suffering or purely personal healing. Every pattern of reactivity you transform within yourself simultaneously weakens that same pattern in the larger field of human consciousness. Every moment of genuine compassion you cultivate adds to the total compassion available in the world. This isn't mystical thinking, but a recognition of how human beings actually function as interconnected systems. When you're in the presence of someone who is genuinely peaceful, your own nervous system naturally begins to entrain to their state of calm. When you encounter someone who is chronically anxious, your system may absorb some of that activation, unless you've developed the stability to maintain your own center. The emotional and energetic states we embody are constantly influencing and being influenced by the states of those around us. In a monastery in ancient Sri Lanka, there was a practice called the meditation of the expanding circle. Practitioners would begin by generating genuine loving kindness toward themselves, really feeling the warmth and acceptance that comes with treating yourself as a beloved friend. Once this feeling was stable, they would expand the circle to include someone they loved easily, perhaps a family member or close friend, sending the same quality of loving warmth in their direction. The practice continued with gradually expanding circles, including neutral people like neighbors or acquaintances, then difficult people who had caused harm or irritation, then entire communities, entire countries, all beings everywhere. The advanced practitioners could maintain this state of universal loving kindness for hours, their hearts so open that the boundaries between self and other dissolved into pure compassion. But the most remarkable aspect of this practice wasn't what happened during formal meditation periods. Villages near monasteries where this practice was common reported unusual levels of harmony and cooperation. Conflicts that had persisted for generations would suddenly resolve. People who had been enemies would find themselves able to communicate with respect and understanding. Children in these communities grew up with unusual capacities for empathy and emotional regulation. Modern research on what scientists call emotional contagion confirms what these ancient practitioners discovered through direct experience. The emotional states we embody literally spread to others through unconscious mirroring of facial expressions, body language, breathing patterns, and nervous system activation. When you maintain genuine peace in challenging circumstances, you're not just helping yourself navigate difficulty more skillfully, you're contributing to the overall peace available in that environment. This understanding transforms your daily interactions from neutral exchanges into opportunities for conscious contribution to collective healing. Every conversation becomes a chance to offer presence rather than reactivity. Every challenging encounter becomes an opportunity to demonstrate that it's possible to remain centered when others are activated. Every moment of genuine kindness becomes a gift to the shared field of human experience. The depth of this contribution often becomes most apparent during what Buddhist teachers call times of collective suffering. When communities face natural disasters, when societies struggle with division and conflict, when global challenges create widespread anxiety and uncertainty, people who have developed inner stability become invaluable resources for collective resilience. There's a teaching story from Japan about a village that was struck by a devastating earthquake, followed by a tsunami. Most of the buildings were destroyed, many lives were lost, and the survivors faced the overwhelming task of rebuilding their entire community. In the midst of this chaos and grief, an elderly woman who had been practicing Buddhist meditation for decades became a natural gathering point for the community's healing process. She didn't possess special organizational skills or resources that others lacked. She wasn't a designated leader or authority figure, but something in her presence communicated unshakable faith that the community could rebuild, that the devastation was not the end of their story, that human beings possess the capacity to create beauty and meaning even after profound loss. People began gathering around her, not because she offered solutions to their practical problems, but because her presence reminded them of their own resilience. In her calm, they remembered that panic was optional. In her continued capacity for gratitude, despite enormous loss, they rediscovered their own appreciation for what remained. In her natural compassion for everyone's suffering, they found permission to grieve fully while also beginning to help each other heal.
Years later, as the village was thriving once again, community members would often speak about how this woman's embodied wisdom had been as essential to their recovery as any material aid they received.
Her individual healing work, practiced quietly for decades, became a resource for collective transformation when it was most needed. This story illustrates what Buddhist psychology recognizes as the profound social dimensions of individual practice. When you develop the capacity to remain centered during crisis, to find gratitude in the midst of loss, to extend compassion even when you're hurting, these capacities become available not just for your personal benefit, but as contributions to whatever community you're part of. The practices of conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, and gratitude cultivation prepare you to be what teachers call a beneficial presence during times when beneficial presence is most desperately needed. Your nervous system's learned capacity to stay regulated under stress allows you to think clearly when others are overwhelmed. Your developed ability to hold difficult emotions without being destroyed by them enables you to witness others' pain without adding your own panic to their struggle. As this understanding of your practice's collective dimensions continues to deepen, you may begin to experience what advanced practitioners describe as the dissolution of the helper-helped distinction. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who occasionally helps others who are struggling, you begin to recognize that healing and awakening are collaborative processes that happen in relationship, rather than individual achievements that some people attain while others don't. In a teaching center in ancient Korea, students would often ask their master about the difference between enlightened and unenlightened people. They expected to hear about special qualities or attainments that separated awakened beings from ordinary individuals. Instead, the master would always give the same surprising answer. There are no enlightened people, he would say. There are only enlightened relationships, enlightened moments, enlightened responses to whatever circumstances arise. What you call enlightenment is not a permanent state that someone achieves, but a quality of presence that emerges when beings meet each other with complete honesty, acceptance, and love. He would demonstrate this by describing how the same person could respond from deep wisdom in one situation and fall into unconscious reactivity in another. A mother comforting her crying child may embody perfect compassion in that moment, while the same woman might become petty and defensive when criticized by her neighbor. The compassion isn't a personal possession she owns. It's a possibility that emerges when the conditions are right. This teaching points to a revolutionary understanding of how transformation actually occurs. Instead of seeing healing as something individuals do in isolation, Buddhist wisdom recognizes it as something that happens between beings when they meet each other with sufficient presence and acceptance. Your individual practice creates the conditions where this kind of meeting becomes possible, but the actual healing often emerges from the field of relationship itself. This understanding naturally leads to what teachers call the practice of conscious relationship, where you begin to approach all your interactions as opportunities for mutual awakening rather than transactions where you're trying to get something or defend against potential threats. In conscious relationship, every person you encounter becomes a teacher who can show you where you're still reactive, where you're holding on to fixed ideas about yourself or others, where you have opportunities to respond with greater wisdom and compassion. The development of conscious relationship doesn't mean becoming a doormat or accepting harmful behavior from others. Instead, it means approaching even difficult interactions with curiosity about what they might teach you while maintaining clear boundaries about what treatment you're willing to accept. It means recognizing that the person who triggers your anger most intensely is often showing you exactly where your next growth edge lies. There's a beautiful practice from the Tibetan tradition called seeing everyone as your teacher, where practitioners learn to approach even the most difficult people with genuine appreciation for the lessons they provide. This doesn't mean liking everyone or trusting people who have proven themselves untrustworthy. It means recognizing that every interaction offers information about your own patterns of reactivity and opportunities to practice responding from wisdom rather than defensiveness. A student once complained to her teacher about a colleague who constantly criticized her work and seemed determined to make her life miserable. "How can I possibly see this person as my teacher?" she asked. "All he does is create problems and spread negativity." The teacher listened thoughtfully and then asked, "What happens in your body when you encounter this person? What emotions arise? What thoughts go through your mind?" As the student described her reactions, the teacher pointed out, Notice that this difficult person is giving you perfect opportunities to practice staying centered when facing criticism, to observe your mind's tendency to create stories about others' motivations, to experiment with maintaining your own sense of worth, regardless of others' opinions. If you only interacted with people who were easy to be around, how would you discover your capacity to remain peaceful in challenging circumstances? This perspective transforms every difficult relationship from a burden to be endured into a curriculum for developing greater emotional resilience and compassion. The people who trigger your strongest reactions become your most valuable teachers, showing you exactly where you still have room to grow in wisdom and acceptance. As this understanding of relationship as mutual awakening continues to mature, many practitioners discover what teachers call the natural arising of service. Instead of service being something you do out of obligation or to feel good about yourself, it emerges as the spontaneous expression of your understanding that your well-being and others' well-being are intimately connected. This service often begins in very simple ways. You might find yourself naturally offering to help when you see someone struggling, not because you think you should, but because their difficulty feels like your own. You might discover that you're less interested in conversations that revolve around gossip or complaint, and more drawn to interactions that support mutual growth and understanding. You might notice that maintaining your own well-being feels less like self-indulgence and more like a responsibility you have to everyone whose life you touch. The expression of service continues to evolve throughout your lifetime, often moving through what teachers call expanding circles of care. Initially, your focused attention might be primarily on your own healing and that of your immediate family. As your capacity grows, you might find yourself naturally extending care to friends, colleagues, and community members. Eventually, your concern may expand to include environmental issues, social justice causes, or global challenges that affect beings you'll never meet personally. This expansion happens organically, rather than through forced effort. As your nervous system becomes accustomed to states of peace and abundance, you naturally become aware of and responsive to suffering wherever you encounter it. As your heart develops the capacity to hold your own pain with compassion, it simultaneously develops the capacity to hold others' pain with the same tenderness. The practices that began as personal healing techniques gradually reveal themselves as preparation for participating in what Buddhist teachers call the great work of reducing suffering and promoting awakening wherever it's needed. Your conscious breathing becomes a contribution to the overall consciousness available in any environment. Your loving awareness of sensation becomes a model for how beings can inhabit their bodies with greater acceptance and appreciation. Your compassionate inner dialogue becomes a demonstration of how people can treat themselves and others with greater kindness. This transformation from individual practice to collective contribution represents what Buddhist psychology calls the natural maturation of wisdom and compassion. When these qualities reach a certain level of development, they naturally overflow into service, not because you decide you should help others, but because the boundaries between your well-being and others' well-being become increasingly transparent. The understanding that emerges from this maturation process is simultaneously humbling and empowering. Humbling because you recognize how interconnected all beings are, how your individual efforts are part of a vast web of causes and conditions that extends far beyond your personal control. Empowering because you discover that every conscious choice you make, every moment of presence you embody, every gesture of kindness you offer contributes to the healing and awakening that's constantly wanting to happen in human consciousness. As we continue to explore the deepening dimensions of Buddhist healing work, the final layers reveal how this understanding of interconnectedness opens into what teachers call the timeless perspective, where healing is recognized not just as something that happens to individuals or communities, but as an ongoing process that has been unfolding throughout human history and will continue long after our individual lives have ended. This timeless perspective represents perhaps the most profound shift in understanding that emerges from sustained Buddhist healing practice. As your individual journey of transformation deepens and expands into conscious contribution to collective healing, you begin to recognize that you're participating in something vastly larger than personal improvement or even community service. You're joining an ancient river of awakening that has been flowing through human consciousness for millennia, carrying the accumulated wisdom of countless beings who have walked this path of healing before you. The practices of conscious breathing, loving awareness, compassionate dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness, and gratitude that have supported your individual transformation are not modern innovations or personal discoveries. They represent refinements and expressions of insights that have been tested and validated by thousands of years of human experience. When you sit quietly and bring conscious attention to your breath, you're doing what contemplatives in caves and monasteries have done for centuries. When you respond to your own suffering with kindness rather than self-attack, you're embodying wisdom that has been passed down through generations of teachers and students. In a monastery perched high in the Himalayas of ancient Tibet, there was a tradition called the lineage meditation, where practitioners would spend time contemplating all the beings who had contributed to their ability to practice. They would begin by acknowledging their immediate teachers, then their teachers' teachers, expanding backward through generations of masters who had preserved and transmitted the healing wisdom they were now receiving. But the meditation didn't stop with formal spiritual lineages. Practitioners would also acknowledge their parents and ancestors, recognizing that their very ability to be alive and learning depended on countless generations of beings who had survived long enough to reproduce and pass on not just genetic material, but cultural knowledge about how to live with greater wisdom and compassion. They would extend appreciation to the farmers who grew their food, the builders who constructed their shelters, the countless anonymous contributors to the web of support that made their practice possible. The meditation would continue until practitioners felt themselves as part of an infinite web of interconnection, extending backward through time to the first beings who discovered that consciousness could be cultivated, that suffering could be transformed, that love and wisdom could be developed through patient practice. In this recognition, their individual healing work revealed itself as part of humanity's ongoing experiment in conscious evolution. This timeless perspective doesn't diminish the importance of your individual journey, but places it within a context that gives it profound meaning and significance. Every moment of healing you experience, every pattern of reactivity you transform, every gesture of kindness you embody, represents a contribution to the accumulated wisdom of human consciousness. You're not just healing yourself, but advancing the collective understanding of what's possible for beings like us. The recognition of this timeless dimension often brings what teachers call the great gratitude, a feeling of profound appreciation that extends beyond personal circumstances to encompass the extraordinary gift of being alive during a time when such profound healing wisdom is available. The breathing techniques that support your nervous system regulation, the mindfulness practices that help you stay present with difficulty, the compassion methods that transform your relationship with suffering, all represent the distilled essence of insights that previous generations discovered through often tremendous effort and sacrifice. There's a teaching story from ancient India about a student who became overwhelmed by gratitude during meditation practice. She had been working with a particular breathing technique that was helping her manage anxiety that had plagued her for years. Suddenly, she found herself weeping not from sadness, but from appreciation for all the beings who had contributed to this moment of healing. She thought of the original teacher who had first discovered that conscious breathing could calm the nervous system. She imagined the students who had refined and preserved the technique through generations of practice. She felt connected to every person who had ever struggled with anxiety and found relief through these methods. Her individual healing revealed itself as part of a vast collaborative project spanning centuries. When she shared this experience with her teacher, he nodded knowingly and said, "You're beginning to understand that healing doesn't belong to any individual. It's a gift that flows through us from the accumulated wisdom of all beings who have ever sought to transform suffering into understanding. When you heal, you're not just helping yourself. You're proving once again that such healing is possible and contributing your own discoveries to the treasure house of human wisdom. This understanding transforms your relationship with both success and failure in your healing journey. When practices work well and you experience periods of clarity and peace, you recognize these successes as confirmations of possibilities that countless others have also discovered. You're not achieving something unique or special, but participating in the ongoing validation of timeless principles about how consciousness and healing actually work. When you encounter periods of difficulty, when old patterns resurface or new challenges arise, you recognize these struggles as part of the same ancient human journey that every being who has ever lived has navigated in their own way. The anxiety you feel about the future is the same anxiety that has moved through human consciousness since beings first developed the capacity to anticipate and worry. The grief you experience when facing loss connects you to every person who has ever had to say goodbye to someone they loved. This recognition doesn't diminish the reality of your personal struggles, but places them within a context that can make them feel less isolating and overwhelming. You're not facing these difficulties alone, but as part of the human community that extends backward and forward through time. The courage you develop in meeting your challenges contributes to the overall courage available to future generations who will face their own versions of the same fundamental human experiences. The practices you're learning to embody represent humanity's ongoing research into how consciousness can be cultivated to create less suffering and more wisdom. Every time you choose presence over reactivity, every moment you respond to difficulty with acceptance rather than resistance, every gesture of compassion you extend to yourself or others, you're conducting experiments that add to our collective understanding of what's possible for beings like us. In the ancient Buddhist universities of India, scholars would often spend their entire lifetimes studying single aspects of what we now recognize as the comprehensive science of consciousness transformation. Some would devote decades to understanding the subtle relationships between breathing patterns and emotional states. Others would focus their research on how specific types of mental cultivation affect physical health and longevity. Still others would investigate the connections between individual transformation and social harmony. The practices available to you today represent the synthesis of thousands of years of such dedicated investigation. The conscious breathing techniques you can learn in a single afternoon incorporate insights that previous generations spent lifetimes discovering and refining. The mindfulness approaches that can help you develop emotional regulation represent the culmination of centuries of exploration into how awareness can be trained and stabilized. This accumulated wisdom represents what Buddhist teachers call the Great Inheritance, a treasure house of tested methods for transformation that belongs not to any particular culture or religion, but to human consciousness itself. As you work with these practices and discover their effects in your own experience, you become both a recipient of this inheritance and a contributor to its ongoing development. Your individual discoveries about what works for your particular nervous system, your unique emotional patterns, your specific life circumstances, become part of the expanding understanding of how these ancient principles can be applied in contemporary contexts. The ways you learn to integrate formal practice with the demands of modern life, the adaptations you develop for practicing while managing work and family responsibilities, the insights you gain about applying Buddhist healing wisdom to issues that previous generations might not have encountered, all represent valuable additions to the collective knowledge. This perspective naturally leads to what teachers call the long view of healing, where transformation is understood to unfold across much larger timescales than individual lifetimes. The patterns of reactivity, fear, and unconsciousness that create suffering in human communities didn't develop overnight and won't be resolved quickly. The wisdom and compassion that represent alternatives to these patterns require patient cultivation across generations of dedicated practitioners. When you maintain your commitment to conscious living, even when progress seems slow, when you continue practicing presence and compassion, even when the world around you seems to be moving in directions that feel unconscious or harmful, you're participating in what might be called the long game of human evolution. You're contributing to gradual shifts in collective consciousness that may not become fully apparent for decades or centuries. There's a teaching from ancient China about a man who spent his life planting trees, knowing that he would never live to see them reach maturity. When people questioned why he worked so hard for benefits he wouldn't personally enjoy, he would reply, "I'm planting these trees for people I'll never meet, the way others planted trees for me that I now enjoy the shade of." This is how real progress happens, through beings who are willing to work for benefits that extend beyond their personal lifetimes. This long-view perspective can provide sustaining motivation during periods when individual or collective healing seems to be progressing slowly. The meditation practice you maintain during busy weeks when you barely have time for anything else, the patience you demonstrate with difficult family members, even when they don't seem to appreciate your efforts, the commitment you maintain to conscious living, even when others around you seem to prefer unconscious patterns, all represent investments in possibilities that may not become fully apparent for years or decades. The accumulated effect of such consistent practice across large numbers of people creates what systems theorists call emergent properties, collective capabilities that arise when individual elements reach certain levels of organization and coherence. As more people develop the capacity to remain present during conflict rather than escalating into reactivity, communities develop greater capacity for resolving disputes peacefully. As more individuals learn to respond to stress with conscious breathing rather than unconscious tension, entire social systems become more resilient in the face of challenges. These emergent properties represent the collective fruits of individual healing work. Your personal commitment to transformation doesn't just benefit you and your immediate relationships, but contributes to larger patterns of increasing consciousness and compassion that can influence communities, societies, and potentially the entire human species. The recognition of these collective dimensions often brings what practitioners describe as a profound sense of purpose and meaning that extends far beyond personal fulfillment. Your healing work reveals itself as part of humanity's ongoing project of learning how to live with greater wisdom, kindness, and skillfulness. The challenges you face and the insights you develop through meeting them with presence and compassion become contributions to our species' understanding of how to transform suffering into wisdom. This understanding naturally leads to what teachers call the dedication of merit, the recognition that whatever benefits arise from your practice belong not just to you, but to all beings who could potentially benefit from such healing. In traditional Buddhist practice, formal sessions often end with a dedication where practitioners consciously offer whatever positive energy or insights have emerged to support the healing and awakening of all life. This dedication isn't based on a belief in supernatural transmission of energy, but on the understanding that individual transformation always occurs within the context of interconnected systems. When you develop greater emotional balance, everyone who interacts with you benefits from your increased capacity for skillful response. When you cultivate genuine compassion, you contribute to the overall compassion available in human consciousness. When you discover methods for transforming personal suffering into wisdom, you add to the repertoire of possibilities available to others facing similar challenges. As this timeless perspective continues to deepen, many practitioners experience what teachers call the dissolution of the helper and helped, the healer and healed, the teacher and student. These roles reveal themselves as temporary functions that people perform within the larger process of collective awakening, rather than fixed identities that some people possess while others don't. In moments of deep practice, you may experience yourself as simultaneously the one who is healing and the one who is healed, the one who is teaching and the one who is learning, the one who is helping and the one who is receiving help. This isn't confusion but clarity about the fundamentally collaborative nature of all transformation. Every healing interaction involves mutual benefit. Every teaching exchange includes learning in both directions. Every moment of service simultaneously serves the giver. This recognition transforms service from something you do for others into something you do with others as part of the shared project of reducing suffering and promoting flourishing wherever it's needed. Your individual healing work becomes inseparable from collective healing work. Your personal awakening becomes part of the awakening that wants to happen in human consciousness generally. The practices that have supported your individual transformation, conscious breathing, loving awareness, compassionate dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness, and gratitude, reveal themselves as expressions of principles that operate at every level of existence. Communities can learn to breathe together, developing collective practices for maintaining calm during challenging periods. Societies can develop greater awareness of their collective emotional patterns and responses. Humanity as a whole can learn to extend compassion to its own struggles with unconsciousness and reactivity, while working patiently toward greater wisdom and skillfulness. As we approach the completion of this exploration of Buddhist healing wisdom, the final understanding that emerges is both simple and profound. The healing you seek through these ancient practices is not separate from the healing that consciousness itself seeks through the medium of human experience. You are not someone who practices healing techniques, but someone through whom healing itself expresses its timeless impulse toward greater wholeness, compassion, and awakening. This profound recognition that you are an expression of healing consciousness itself, rather than someone who possesses or practices healing techniques, represents the deepest understanding that emerges from sustained engagement with Buddhist wisdom. In this recognition, the separation between practitioner and practice dissolves into a seamless flow of conscious awareness meeting whatever arises with increasing skill and compassion. The breathing that flows through you is not your breath, but the breath of life itself, temporarily expressing through the particular form you call yourself. The awareness that observes your thoughts and emotions is not personal consciousness, but the universal capacity for knowing that manifests through countless beings throughout time and space. The compassion that arises when you meet suffering with acceptance is not your individual accomplishment, but love itself flowing through the temporary vessel of your human experience. This understanding brings what Buddhist teachers call the Great Relief, the recognition that you don't have to create or maintain your fundamental wholeness, because it's not something you could lose even if you tried. The peace you seek through practice is not an achievement you attain, but your natural state temporarily obscured by patterns of resistance and identification with painful mental formations. The love and wisdom you cultivate through conscious breathing, mindful awareness, and compassionate response are not foreign imports, but expressions of your deepest nature that emerge naturally when obstacles to their expression are gradually dissolved. In a monastery hidden deep in the forests of ancient Myanmar, there lived a master who was renowned for her extraordinary ordinariness. Students would arrive expecting to find someone who radiated obvious spiritual attainment or demonstrated supernatural abilities. Instead, they encountered a woman who swept floors with complete attention, cooked simple meals with obvious enjoyment, and listened to visitors with such natural presence that they felt immediately at ease in ways they couldn't explain. When students pressed her about advanced practices or special techniques for achieving enlightenment, she would smile and continue whatever simple activity she was engaged in. "What you call enlightenment," she would say, while washing vegetables, "is nothing more than doing exactly what needs to be done in each moment with complete presence and genuine care. The vegetables don't need to be enlightened to be perfectly themselves. The water doesn't struggle to be wet. The earth doesn't effort to be supportive. They simply express their nature fully, and this full expression is what you're seeking to learn." One particularly earnest student challenged her, saying, "But surely there must be something more than just ordinary activities. What about the suffering in the world? What about all the people who are trapped in patterns of pain and reactivity? How can simple presence address such massive problems?" The master paused in her vegetable washing and looked directly at the student with eyes that seemed to contain infinite compassion. "When I wash these vegetables with complete presence," she replied, "I am demonstrating to the universe that it's possible for consciousness to be fully here, fully engaged, fully loving in the midst of ordinary activity. This demonstration sends ripples through the fabric of reality itself. Every moment of genuine presence contributes to the overall presence available in existence. Every gesture of authentic care adds to the total care flowing through life. This is not small or insignificant. This is how transformation actually happens, one conscious moment at a time." This teaching points to perhaps the most revolutionary insight in Buddhist healing wisdom, the understanding that awakening expresses itself not through dramatic spiritual experiences or otherworldly states of consciousness, but through the complete embrace of ordinary human experience with extraordinary presence and love. The enlightenment you seek is not an escape from your humanity, but the full embodiment of what human consciousness is capable of when it stops fighting against itself and learns to work with the natural laws of healing and transformation. As this understanding stabilizes in your direct experience, The practices that once required effort and discipline begin to express themselves effortlessly through your natural way of being. You don't have to remember to breathe consciously, because conscious breathing becomes your default way of moving through the world. You don't have to force compassionate responses, because compassion arises spontaneously from your growing understanding of the shared nature of all experience. You don't have to work at staying present, because presence becomes as natural as your heartbeat. This effortless embodiment represents what teachers call the fruition of the path, not because you've reached some final destination, but because you've learned to align so completely with the natural flow of consciousness that there's no longer any sense of swimming against the current. You've discovered how to work with your nervous system rather than against it, how to support your body's innate healing wisdom rather than interfering with it, how to cultivate emotional balance through acceptance rather than forcing artificial control. The 8 practices we've explored throughout this journey: conscious breathing, loving awareness of sensation, compassionate inner dialogue, conscious rest, mindful movement, forgiveness work, gratitude cultivation, and their integration into seamless daily living, reveal themselves not as techniques you apply to fix problems, but as expressions of your natural way of being, when artificial obstacles to health and wholeness are gradually dissolved. Your breath naturally wants to flow freely and deeply, supporting optimal nervous system function and emotional regulation. Your body naturally wants to be inhabited with love and appreciation rather than criticism and neglect. Your mind naturally wants to speak to itself with the same kindness you would offer to a beloved friend. Your nervous system naturally wants to move through cycles of appropriate activation and deep rest. Your physical form naturally wants to move in ways that support rather than strain its structure. Your heart naturally wants to release resentments that create ongoing toxicity and extend gratitude that nourishes both yourself and others. The healing that emerges through working with these natural impulses represents not the imposition of artificial spiritual ideals, but the removal of learned patterns that interfere with your innate capacity for health, happiness, and wisdom. Every moment of conscious breathing strengthens neural pathways that support calm alertness. Every gesture of self-compassion rewires emotional response patterns toward greater kindness. Every period of genuine rest allows your system to complete healing processes that chronic stress had been interrupting. This understanding transforms your relationship with both progress and setbacks on the healing path. When you experience periods of clarity, emotional balance, and physical well-being, you recognize these as glimpses of your natural state, rather than achievements you need to maintain through constant effort. When old patterns resurface or new challenges arise, you meet them as temporary weather in the vast sky of awareness, rather than evidence that you've failed or lost your progress. There's a profound teaching from the Zen tradition about a student who became frustrated with what seemed like cyclical patterns in her healing journey. Just when she thought she had resolved particular emotional reactions, they would resurface in new forms. Just when she felt confident in her ability to remain centered, life would present circumstances that challenged her equanimity. She complained to her teacher that she seemed to be going in circles rather than making linear progress. The teacher took her to the monastery garden, where a large spiral staircase led to an observation platform overlooking the surrounding valley. "Tell me," he said as they climbed, "are we going in circles, or are we ascending?" The student looked around and realized that while they were indeed moving in a circular pattern, each revolution brought them higher and provided broader perspective on the landscape below. "Your healing journey follows the same pattern," the teacher explained. "You encounter similar themes and challenges repeatedly, but each time you meet them from a higher level of understanding and capacity. The anger you experience today is met with much greater awareness than the anger you felt last year. The anxiety that arises now moves through you more quickly because you've learned not to resist it. You're not going in circles, you're spiraling upward, encountering similar territory with increasing wisdom. This spiral understanding helps explain why sustainable transformation rarely happens through dramatic breakthrough moments, though such moments certainly occur. More commonly, healing happens through what might be called the patient accumulation of conscious moments. Each small choice to respond rather than react, each gentle breath taken in the middle of difficulty, each moment of compassion offered to your own struggles, creating a foundation for deeper transformation. The patience required for this kind of healing represents a radical departure from the instant gratification that characterizes much of contemporary culture. In a world that expects rapid results and immediate solutions, the organic pace of genuine healing can feel frustratingly slow. But Buddhist wisdom recognizes that the most profound changes happen at the speed of nature rather than the speed of human impatience. As your embodiment of these healing principles continues to mature, you may begin to experience what teachers call the natural arising of beneficial influence. Your presence becomes healing for others, not because you're trying to heal them, but because you're no longer adding your own unprocessed reactivity to whatever situations you encounter. Your calm becomes contagious. Your acceptance creates space for others to be authentic about their struggles. Your compassion reminds people of their own capacity for kindness. This beneficial influence extends beyond human relationships to your connection with the natural world, your work environment, and the broader community you're part of. When you bring genuine presence to whatever you're doing, whether it's cooking a meal, driving to work, or having a conversation with a neighbor, you're contributing to the overall quality of consciousness present in those activities. You become what teachers call a healing presence in the world, not through special powers or dramatic actions, but simply through the consistent embodiment of the principles these practices cultivate. The recognition that your individual healing work contributes to collective transformation brings what many practitioners describe as a profound sense of meaning and purpose that extends far beyond personal benefit. You're not just improving your own life, but participating in humanity's ongoing experiment in conscious evolution. Every pattern of reactivity you transform contributes to the overall wisdom available in human consciousness. Every moment of genuine presence adds to the total presence flowing through life. Every gesture of authentic compassion increases the compassion accessible to all beings. This understanding naturally leads to what Buddhist teachers call the dedication of merit, the recognition that whatever benefits arise from your practice belong not just to you, but to all beings who could potentially benefit from such healing. Your individual discoveries about how to breathe consciously, how to inhabit your body with love, how to speak to yourself with kindness, how to rest deeply, how to move wisely, how to forgive completely, and how to appreciate genuinely become part of the accumulated wisdom of human consciousness. The practices that have supported your transformation represent refinements of insights that have been tested and validated by thousands of years of human experience. When you work with conscious breathing, you're participating in discoveries that date back to the earliest contemplatives, who recognized the intimate connection between breath, emotion, and awareness. When you develop loving awareness of physical sensation, you're embodying understanding that ancient healers developed about the relationship between consciousness and embodiment. In this recognition, your personal healing journey reveals itself as part of something vastly larger than individual improvement. You're joining an ancient stream of awakening that has been flowing through human consciousness for millennia, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of countless beings who have walked this path before you and will continue walking it long after your individual lifetime has ended. This timeless perspective brings what teachers call the great gratitude, appreciation that extends beyond personal circumstances to encompass the extraordinary gift of being alive during a time when such profound healing wisdom is available. The breathing techniques that support your nervous system regulation, the awareness practices that help you stay present with difficulty, the compassion methods that transform your relationship with suffering, all represent the distilled essence of insights that previous generations discovered through often tremendous dedication and sacrifice. Your commitment to embodying these principles in contemporary contexts contributes to their ongoing evolution and adaptation. The ways you learn to integrate ancient wisdom with modern life, the discoveries you make about applying timeless principles to current challenges, the insights you develop about practicing in the midst of technological overstimulation and social complexity, all represent valuable additions to the treasure house of human knowledge about healing and transformation. As this understanding continues to deepen, the boundary between your individual practice and your contribution to collective awakening dissolves completely. You recognize that healing consciousness is using your particular life circumstances, your unique nervous system, your specific emotional patterns and physical challenges as a laboratory for discovering what's possible when ancient wisdom meets contemporary experience with complete commitment and authentic engagement. The breath flowing through you, the awareness observing your thoughts and emotions, the compassion arising when you meet difficulty with acceptance, the wisdom emerging when you respond rather than react, all reveal themselves as expressions of the same fundamental intelligence that moves the planets in their orbits, guides the migration of birds, and orchestrates the healing of wounds without conscious direction. You are not separate from this intelligence, but a temporary manifestation of it, a unique expression of consciousness exploring its own capacity for transformation and awakening. In this recognition, the journey of healing comes full circle, revealing that what you sought to achieve through practice was never separate from what you fundamentally are. The peace, love, and wisdom you've cultivated represent not acquisitions, but discoveries of qualities that were present all along, temporarily obscured by patterns of resistance and identification with painful mental formations, but never actually absent or damaged. The practices continue, but they no longer feel like work. They express themselves as naturally as flowers blooming in spring, as spontaneously as birds singing at dawn, as effortlessly as your heart beating in your chest. You have become what you were always meant to be, not through striving or achievement, but through the patient removal of everything that was preventing your natural radiance from shining forth. This is the deepest gift of Buddhist healing wisdom, not the promise of becoming someone better than who you are, but the recognition that who you are, in your essential nature, is already whole, already wise, already capable of meeting whatever life presents with grace and love. The journey continues, but it continues as an expression of gratitude for this recognition rather than a search for something still missing. In each conscious breath, each moment of loving awareness, each gesture of compassion, you are both receiving and offering the timeless gift of awakening that belongs to all life. This is not the end of practice, but its true beginning, the point where healing reveals itself as the natural expression of consciousness that knows itself fully and loves itself completely just as it is.